Sweet fresh corn, $1.50 a pound. I had a bag of corn in my arms as I walked home. Chicken noodle soup was my kid's favorite. My name is Sarah, and I'm 46 years old. My husband's name is Max. My son Jake is a senior in high school, and my daughter Lily is a sophomore. I'm just an ordinary housewife. I bought a couple of pounds of sweet corn at a good price from a local grocery store and felt happy as I walked home. Sweet corn, carrots, celery, my broth always turned out great. I also added broccoli. My kids loved my soup. I took a deep breath, enjoying the smell, and waited for my family to come home. The smell of chicken broth filled the house. Jake came home first. "Oh, chicken noodle soup tonight?" "You guessed it. I haven't had it in a while." "Did you want more chicken and noodles?" "Of course." Then Lily came in. "Yay, chicken noodle soup, smells so good. Perfect for the cold weather." See, my soup was popular. Max was taking longer than usual. We decided to eat without him. It was almost 11 p.m. when he finally came home. "Why so late? I thought today was no overtime day," I asked. "Well, we had some extra work to do," he said shortly. Maybe he had a rough day. Chicken noodle soup was the perfect comfort food to help with a bad mood. "I see. Well, eat and relax," I said. "Have some soup." But Max sighed. "I already ate out." "Really?" I was disappointed. "I got 2 pounds of sweet corn on sale today. I thought you'd be tasting the soup for round 2. That's just like you." "What?" I froze. I'd never heard him speak like that before. He sighed again, took off his tie, and went to the bathroom. I was left sitting at the table with a pot of soup. After that, his attitude toward me changed. He started coming home later and later, not returning until after midnight, and on weekends he was always gone. When I asked him where he was going, he'd say, "Nowhere special." If I pressed him, he'd just reply, "No point in telling you." One Sunday evening, when I was feeling down, Lily came home from her part-time job. As soon as she opened the door, she yelled out, "Mom, you won't believe what I saw." I didn't even get a chance to react before she continued. "I saw Dad with Anna at Starbucks today." She was shaking. "Anna?" I froze. She was my friend from college, and Lily knew her. Anna was younger, a little flashy, and not really my age. "No way. I think he's cheating." They were holding hands and didn't care if anyone saw. That Starbucks is right across from where I work. It's like they wanted me to find out. Oh my God, I fell to the floor. Jake heard us and came downstairs. I thought he was cheating too. He's been on his phone, smiling all the time. "Mom, you've been too blind to notice." Oh my God. Oh my God. We decided we needed to confront Max. We waited for him to come home. When he finally came in, I immediately asked him, "What were you doing with Anna?" He didn't even try to deny it. "We went on a date." He said he ran into her at a bookstore, and they decided to grab a drink. They spent time together, and he fell for her. "I'm lonely. I'm tired of being single and working," he explained. Anna flirted with him, and before he knew it, they were close. "I'm sorry, but I've been thinking about this for a while. You've changed. You've gained weight, and I don't see you as the woman I fell in love with anymore. I want to be in love all the time, and I want to feel wanted." I was shocked. Sure, Anna was younger and attractive, but we had been a family for so many years. I tried to make him understand. "We've gotten used to each other, but I still love you. I'm not in love with you anymore." I felt weak as I sat there. Max went to the bathroom. It hit me. He didn't love me anymore. He wanted a divorce because there was no passion. I didn't know how to respond. We had a son and a daughter in high school. I couldn't just let him leave. I thought about what could change his mind. Maybe his parents could talk to him. So I went to Max's parents' house. But when I told them what was going on, their response wasn't what I expected. First, my father-in-law said, "They say a man's ability to cheat is a sign of his worth. It's a good thing he still has it at his age." Then my mother-in-law added, "It's your fault he's cheating. Maybe you don't cook good meals or leave the house a mess. Maybe you don't do the laundry or clean the bathroom." I couldn't stand it anymore. "I do all of that," I shouted. She sneered, "I'm not so sure. And how about this? Do you keep a figure that my son isn't embarrassed to walk around with in public?" My father-in-law also chimed in, "Your stomach is hanging out of your pants," and then they both left. When I got home, Max was already there. "Hey, you went to see my parents today, didn't you? I got a text saying they blamed you for my cheating." "What?" I couldn't believe it. "But, our family," I tried to explain, but he cut me off. "I didn't want them to know." Then he added, "I guess we'll have to get a divorce now that they know." He couldn't wait to leave this family and start a new life with Anna. I could only sigh and say, "I'll handle this." I hired a lawyer, determined to get full custody of the kids and child support. I knew it would cost me a lot, but I figured I could also get alimony since I was involving an attorney. Jake said, "Bottom line, he left us, right? Don't let it get to you." Lily, too, said cheerfully, "You've got this, Mom." They both reassured me. Forget about the selfish jerk who's chasing after his lost youth instead of his family. Lily was especially upset by Max's actions, and I was proud of how strong they were. I asked the local grocery store where I bought the sweet corn for a job and started working part-time. I had to support my kids and get them ready for college. A few months went by, and our life was better than expected. The grocery store owner often gave me leftover vegetables, which helped us financially. I was really grateful for the job. Both Jake and Lily were almost adults now, so our lifestyle didn't change much. I felt relieved. I stayed busy with their schoolwork and my own job. Then one day, I got a call from Max. "Hey, I want to come over. Can we talk?" I didn't think there was anything to talk about, but my kids behind me said, "It's okay, right? We've got things to say too." So we agreed to meet. Max came over on the weekend. I made some buffalo wings for the team and cinnamon rolls for Lily. I handed them to the kids, smiling. "Thank you," I said, passing them to the kids, just like Max used to do. But then Max looked at me and said I didn't want my parents to know about all of this. "What do you want?" I asked, already feeling frustrated. He quickly replied, "It's my fault. Please, let me come back." What? After everything, I was shocked. He had left on his own, and now he wanted to come back. What was going on? The kids and I stared at him, waiting for an explanation. He told us that living with Anna had opened his eyes to how different their financial values were. Anna was beautiful, always surrounded by champagne and city views. Max said, "It's nice to be in love," and he divorced me for her. But then Anna got tired of working, and Max, wanting to be the provider, told her, "You don't have to work. I'll take care of you. I used to support a wife and 2 kids, so I can support you alone." She quit her job, but soon it was clear that she was all about luxury, designer clothes, expensive cosmetics, and spending lots of time at the gym with a personal trainer. Meanwhile, Max was a homebody, and his salary couldn't even cover her lifestyle. She was frustrated and started pressuring him for more money. They fought because their values didn't match. To top it off, Max had never even tasted a home-cooked meal from Anna. She didn't even know how to make a simple dish like chicken soup. She either had takeout or fancy restaurant meals. Now, Max wanted to come back after everything fell apart. He thought he could just return after abandoning us. "We've been together since your salary was barely enough to live on. Do you know how hard I worked to feed 2 kids?" I scolded him. Jake, my son, who had been listening, spoke up seriously. "Even though I never went to Disney World, I had fun enough having a picnic with Mom's fried chicken." "Dad, you're like a barracuda. You go after shiny things, but once you get caught, you just want to swim back to the ocean. You left us for someone else, and now you want to come back because it didn't work out. You think we'll just take you back?" "Enough with the nonsense," Jake said harshly. "Yeah, I agree," said Lily. Max barely managed to say, "I regret going for something new. Family is the most important thing." "Family is important, but it's too late for that," I replied. "What does a man who threw his family away so easily know about family?" Jake said, glaring at Max. Max didn't seem to get it. He kept talking nonsense, saying he thought it would be better if my parents talked to us. So he went to them. At that moment, both Jake and Lily spit out their soda. Jake even choked on it. "You went to tell my parents your shameful story." I was shocked. I can't even process this. You used to talk to my parents before we got married, so... Wait, this is totally different. I snapped, but then I let him keep talking. "Your dad said it's a man's fault if he's irresponsible," Max said proudly. "I have nothing to say to a man who left my precious daughter and 2 grandkids behind," I said coldly. Max didn't want to continue talking. Maybe our values were just too different now. I paused for a moment, thinking about what he said. Then my phone beeped. It was a text from my dad. Your ex-husband came over today. He creeps me out. Please don't let him come around again. I laughed and showed it to Max. Oh no, I said. Jake, sitting calmly, said, I love Grandpa. I don't want Grandpa to know about this, I said helplessly. I don't understand how such a pathetic man can be a father, Jake said, his voice full of frustration. I can't understand his thoughts or behavior. Mom, you have no choice but to cut ties with him. I don't want my parents to know, no choice but to divorce, I said. Jake looked at me with a mix of disbelief and frustration. What Max told me is that you came back to him like a boomerang. You left us because you changed your mind. You think we'd just take you back after everything. Lily added, you said you no longer loved Mom, but you also lost love for your family too. The form of love changes over the years, Lily continued, his voice steady. When I was little, I simply loved my mother. Now it's more like, thank you, Mom, for everything. What do you mean by, you want to be in love like 20 years ago and watch Back to the Future? Max stood there, unable to respond. Then Jake delivered the final blow. You know, I actually got into Columbia on a scholarship. Max's eyes widened. What? Jake shot him a cold look. Shut up. You're not even worth congratulating. If anyone asks about my family, I'll say I never had a father. I don't want a father who doesn't see the love of family, Jake said firmly. Lily nodded, adding, I won't even invite you to my wedding. I don't want to walk down the aisle with you. Go back to your shiny, money-spending lifestyle. Max tried to defend himself, his arguments becoming more incomprehensible. I couldn't take it anymore. Take your buffalo wings and cinnamon rolls and get out. We kicked him out, and I didn't look back. Afterward, Max fell into depression and quit his job. Now he works part-time as a janitor at a gym and sells counterfeit designer goods on the street. As for Anna, she returned to her old job after quitting the gym. Apparently, she had gained too much weight and couldn't fit into her expensive dresses anymore. A friend of mine who works as a dressmaker told me Anna had tried on tight dresses, asking for compliments. It was laughable. Life, as it turned out, wasn't so glamorous after all. I walked home with a bag of sweet, fresh corn from the grocer, feeling a sense of calm that had been absent for a long time. Chicken noodle soup tonight, I offered to the kids, the routine bringing a sense of warmth to our home. The owner of the grocery store had offered me a full-time position, teaching customers how to choose fresh produce. The work was well received by the customers and appreciated by the owner. It felt good to have found something that worked. Eventually, Max and Anna divorced. She cursed him, saying, You've got no money. How can you live like that? Max, who had never done any housework, was now struggling to live on his own. His apartment was said to be a mess. He continued texting me, asking, Please clean my place. Please cook for me. I want to see my kids. I ignored him, then completely blocked him out of my life. Today, though, was Jake's graduation day. He looked so grown up in his suit, walking out the door with a smile. Have a good day, I said, my voice breaking. As he turned to face me, he said, Mom, thank you for everything. Love you. The door closed behind him, and I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. I cried, but I also smiled through the pain. Congratulations, I whispered to myself. Congratulations on your graduation. Congratulations on your first step into adulthood. Lily, who had been quietly watching, tapped me on the shoulder. Let's get ready. Let's join him on his big day. The early summer sunlight filtered through the windows as I began to get dressed. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace settling in. The December wind cut through my thin jacket as I stood on the doorstep of the Mason family estate, watching my mother-in-law's perfectly manicured hand wave goodbye before she slammed the heavy oak door in my face. I placed one hand protectively over my growing belly, trying to process how quickly everything had fallen apart. My name is Emma Chen, and at 28 years old, I found myself pregnant, alone, and locked out of what had been my home for the past 3 years. But Victoria Mason had no idea what she'd just done, or who she was really dealing with. You'll thank me for this later, James, I heard her say through the door to my husband. She was never good enough for you. No connections, no family money, just some scholarship girl who got lucky. I waited for James to defend me, to say something. Anything. But his silence spoke volumes, the same silence that had grown between us over the past few months as his mother's influence poisoned everything we built together. The irony was, Victoria Mason was right about one thing. I had gotten lucky, but not in the way she thought. 3 years ago, I was a software engineer fresh out of MIT, working on an AI algorithm that could revolutionize supply chain management. James and I met at a tech conference where I was presenting my research. He was there representing his family's shipping company, Mason Global Logistics. It was love at first sight, at least that's what I thought. The wedding was rushed, small, intimate. Victoria never approved, but James had insisted. "We don't need their blessing," he'd said back then. "We just need each other." Those words felt hollow now as I stood in the cold, watching my breath form clouds in the frigid air. What Victoria didn't know was that for the past year, I'd been building something in secret. Something that would change everything. The algorithm I'd been developing wasn't just theoretical anymore, it was ready. And while Victoria was busy planning charity galas and criticizing my common background, I'd been quietly meeting with investors, securing patents, and laying the groundwork for my own company. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling slightly from both cold and adrenaline, and dialed the one person I knew I could count on. "Maya, it's happening." They kicked me out. Maya Chen, my older sister and brilliant corporate lawyer, didn't miss a beat. "I'm on my way. The apartment is ready. Time to launch Plan B." I could hear her grabbing her keys, the determination in her voice giving me strength. Maya had always been my rock, especially after we lost our parents in an accident 10 years ago. She was the one who'd encouraged me to keep working on my algorithm even after I married James. "Never put all your eggs in one basket, little sister," she'd warned me. Especially not a golden one. As I waited for Maya, I thought about the last conversation I'd had with James earlier that morning. He found the prenatal vitamins in my drawer, and instead of being happy about the baby, he looked worried. "Did you plan this?" he'd asked, his voice tight. "Is this some kind of trap?" The accusation had stunned me. Trap? "James, we're married. We talked about having children." "Mother thinks the timing is suspicious," he'd said, running his hands through his hair. "With the company's merger coming up." I should have seen it then, how deeply his mother's paranoia had infected him. How the sweet, supportive man I'd marry had become just another puppet in Victoria Mason's grand plan for her family's dynasty. Maya's sleek black Tesla pulled up to the curb, and she jumped out, wrapping me in a fierce hug. "Those pretentious snobs," she muttered, helping me with my bags. "Just wait until they see what's coming." As we drove away from the Mason estate, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. Victoria thought she was protecting her family's empire by getting rid of me. She had no idea she'd just set in motion exactly what I'd been waiting for. Maya glanced at me as she navigated through the city streets. "You okay? The stress isn't good for the baby." I placed a hand on my belly, feeling a small kick. "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. Remember how you told me to always have a backup plan?" She nodded, turning onto the highway that led to her downtown apartment building. "Well," I said, pulling out my laptop, "I have something to show you. That algorithm I've been working on. It's not just theoretical anymore. I've been running simulations using Mason Global's shipping data that James gave me access to when we first got married." Maya's eyes widened. "Emma, what exactly have you been up to?" I opened my laptop, showing her the results of my latest simulation. I've created an AI-driven logistics system that can predict supply chain disruptions before they happen, optimize shipping routes in real time, and reduce costs by up to 40%. I call it chain sight. "And you've tested this using Mason Global's data?" I nodded. "James gave me full access to their systems when we got married. He wanted me to understand the family business. Victoria was furious about it, but he insisted. I've been running simulations for months, perfecting the algorithm." Maya pulled into her building's parking garage, turning to face me fully. "Emma, do you realize what you have here?" "I do," I said, closing my laptop. "And so do the venture capitalists I've been meeting with. They're ready to fund ChainSight's launch. We're just waiting for my signal." Maya's face broke into a wide grin. "And Victoria just gave you the perfect reason to launch." As we rode the elevator to Maya's penthouse apartment, I thought about Victoria's smug face as she pushed me out the door. She thought she was getting rid of a gold digger, a nobody who trapped her precious son. Instead, she just freed me to become her biggest competitor. Maya's apartment was everything the Mason estate wasn't: modern, minimal, and warm. She'd set up the guest room for me weeks ago, just in case. My sister had always been the pragmatic one. "Get some rest," she said, helping me unpack. "Tomorrow, we start making calls. It's time to show the Masons what a nobody from nowhere can really do." That night, as I lay in bed, my hand resting on my growing belly, I felt stronger than I had in months. Victoria thought she was protecting her family's legacy. Instead, she'd just given me the push I needed to build my home. My phone buzzed. A text from James. "Mother says this is for the best. I'm sorry." I didn't respond. Let him think I was broken, devastated. Let Victoria believe she'd won. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I woke up to an email from my lead investor, Sarah Chen. No relation, though we joked about it. "Ready when you are. Say the word and we'll start the funding round." I looked out Maya's window at the city skyline, where Mason Global's headquarters dominated the view. Soon, they'd see my company's name up there too. But first, I had work to do. Maya was already up, making breakfast and taking calls. She cleared her schedule for the next week to help me set everything in motion. As I walked into the kitchen, she handed me a prenatal vitamin and a glass of orange juice. "The team's ready," she said, hanging up her phone. "We can file the incorporation papers today. You're sure about this?" I took the vitamin, thinking about James' accusation yesterday. Had I planned this? Not exactly. But I'd been prepared for it thanks to Maya's constant warnings and my own instincts. "I'm sure," I said, pulling out my laptop. "Victoria wants a war. Let's give her one." Maya smiled, that fierce, protective smile I'd known all my life. "Then let's get to work." The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, calls, and paperwork. Maya's law firm handled everything efficiently, and by the end of the week, Chainsight was officially incorporated. The initial funding round was oversubscribed. It seemed every investor in town wanted a piece of what we were building. James tried calling several times, but I let everything go to voicemail. His messages grew increasingly anxious as news of Chainsight's incorporation spread through the business community. "Emma, what are you doing?" his last message demanded. "Mother's furious. She says you stole company secrets. We could sue you for this." I played the message for Maya, who just laughed. "Let them try. Every bit of data you used was legally accessed with full permission. We have James's emails proving it." She was right, of course. I documented everything meticulously, knowing this day might come. Victoria Mason hadn't raised an idiot for a son. She just never expected his wife to be smarter than he was. As I ended part one of my story here, I was just getting started. Victoria Mason thought she'd taught me a lesson about knowing my place. Instead, she'd given me exactly what I needed: freedom to build something that would change everything, not just for me and my baby, but for the entire industry she thought she controlled. The real question was, what would happen when she realized exactly what she'd done? 6 months after Victoria Mason slammed her door in my face, I stood in front of a packed conference room at the National Logistics Convention. My hand rested on my now visible baby bump as I prepared to demonstrate Chainsight to the industry's biggest players. The irony wasn't lost on me that Mason Global's leadership team sat in the front row, Victoria and James among them. Victoria's face was set in its usual mask of cold disdain, but I could see the tension in her jaw. James just looked pale. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady despite the flutter of movement in my belly. "What you're about to see will revolutionize how we think about supply chain management." As I launched into the demonstration, showing real-time optimization of shipping routes and predictive analytics that could save companies millions, I watched Victoria's expression shift from dismissive to concerned. By the time I showed the cost-saving projections, she was gripping her armrests so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The past 6 months had been intense. Maya and I had worked around the clock, building the company from her penthouse apartment. Our team grew quickly, brilliant engineers and developers who believed in the vision. The pregnancy hadn't been easy, but every kick from my baby felt like a reminder of why I was doing this. Victoria had tried everything to stop us. First came the cease and desist letters, claiming I'd stolen proprietary information. Maya's legal team shut that down quickly, producing documentation of every permission James had given me to access their systems. Then came the whisper campaign. Rumors about my character, my background, suggestions that I was unstable. But Victoria had underestimated how much the industry was ready for change. Chainsite's early trials with smaller shipping companies had produced results that couldn't be ignored. "Any questions?" I asked as I concluded the presentation. The room erupted with raised hands, but Victoria was already on her feet. "This is nothing but smoke and mirrors," she announced, her voice sharp. "Ms. Chen claims her system can reduce costs by 40%, but where's the proof? Mason Global has been in this industry for generations. We know what's possible and what isn't." I smiled, having anticipated this moment. "Excellent question, Mrs. Mason. Perhaps your son can help answer it, since he's seen the system in action." All eyes turned to James, who looked like he wanted to disappear. He knew exactly what I was referring to. The trial runs I'd done using Mason Global's data, the ones he'd enthusiastically approved before his mother poisoned everything. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his face betrayed him. "Really?" I pulled up a series of emails on the screen behind me. "Because according to these messages, you were quite impressed with the initial results. In fact, you called them revolutionary and suggested implementing them company-wide." Victoria's face turned scarlet. The emails were damning, not just for their content, but because they proved every accusation she'd made about me stealing company secrets was false. James had been my biggest supporter, right up until she turned him against me. After the presentation, investors swarmed around me. Maya handled most of them, her legal expertise proving invaluable as we fielded partnership offers and investment proposals. I noticed James hovering at the edge of the crowd, looking lost. Finally, he approached me as the room began to clear. Victoria was nowhere in sight. "Emma," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. The man I'd fallen in love with seemed smaller somehow, diminished. "About what, James? About how you let your mother kick out your pregnant wife? Or about how you've spent the last 6 months trying to destroy what I've built?" He flinched. "I didn't know about the baby, about any of it." Mother said. "That's the problem." I cut him off. Mother said, "Mother thinks, Mother knows best. When was the last time you thought for yourself?" "The company's stock dropped 15% after your presentation," he said, changing tactics. Mother's furious. "The board is asking questions. Maybe we could work something out." I laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Now you want to work something out? After everything?" "You're still my wife," he said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. "Actually, I'm not. The divorce papers were delivered to your office this morning. Maya's firm handled everything. You should read them carefully, especially the part about the baby." His face fell. "Emma, please. That's my child too." "Yes," I agreed, "and you'll have visitation rights once they're born. But you lost the right to be their father the day you chose your mother over your family." Maya appeared at my elbow, right on cue. "Everything okay here?" James stepped back, his shoulders slumping. I'm sorry, Emma, for everything." "I'm not," I said honestly. "Everything that happened led me here. Chainsite is already revolutionizing the industry, and we're just getting started. So thank your mother for me, James. She gave me exactly what I needed, freedom." As he walked away, Maya squeezed my arm. "You okay?" I nodded, watching James disappear into the crowd. "Better than okay. Did you see the partnership offers we got today? 6 major shipping companies want to implement Chainsite immediately," Maya confirmed. "And that's just the beginning. Victoria's worst nightmare is coming true. You're not just competing with Mason Global. You're going to surpass them." 2 weeks later, I sat in my new office, reviewing the latest performance reports. Chainsite was growing faster than even our most optimistic projections had predicted. Companies were switching to our system in droves, drawn by the cost savings and efficiency improvements. Mason Global's stock had continued to fall as investors questioned their ability to compete in the changing landscape. I'd heard through industry gossip that Victoria had been forced to step down from the board, though she was fighting it every step of the way. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Maya entered, waving a tablet. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up a news article. The headline made me catch my breath. "Mason Global Logistics announces major restructuring. CEO James Mason steps down." "He's leaving the company?" I asked, scanning the article. Maya nodded. "Word is he's starting his own venture. something about embracing innovation and new directions in logistics. I sat back, absently rubbing my belly where the baby was kicking. His mother must be beside herself. Oh, she is, Maya grinned. But that's not all. Look at the last paragraph. I read it and felt a strange mix of emotions. In a surprising move, James Mason has expressed interest in potential collaborations with emerging industry leaders, specifically citing ChainSight's revolutionary approach to supply chain management. What do you think? Maya asked. Should we hear him out? I thought about it, remembering the man I've fallen in love with, the one who'd been excited about innovation before his mother's influence took over. Maybe, free from Victoria's control, that man still existed somewhere. Set up a meeting, I decided. But make it clear, this is business, nothing more. If he wants to work with ChainSight, he'll need to prove himself just like anyone else. Maya nodded, understanding perfectly. And Victoria? I smiled, thinking of my former mother-in-law and her grand plans for her family's legacy. She can watch from the sidelines as everything she tried to protect gets transformed by the nobody from nowhere she threw out in the cold. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and I placed both hands on my belly. In 2 months, I'd be a mother myself. But unlike Victoria, I would teach my child that true legacy isn't about maintaining control. It's about having the courage to create something new. Victoria had thought she was protecting her son's inheritance when she kicked me out that cold December day. Instead, she triggered a revolution in the industry she thought she controlled, led by the very person she underestimated most. As I looked out my office window at the city skyline, where the ChainSight logo now shone as brightly as Mason Global's, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about soaring higher than your enemies ever thought possible. The dinner party was in full swing, crystal glasses clinking as Seattle's elite mingled in my former mother-in-law's mansion. I shouldn't have been there. Technically, I wasn't even invited. But when your company caters the most exclusive events in the city, you sometimes end up in interesting situations. Olivia, darling. Margaret Wellington's voice cut through the crowd. You simply must try these divine crab cakes. They're from Milano's, of course. Not like that dreadful catering service my ex-daughter-in-law runs. I kept my focus on arranging the dessert display, fighting back a smile. If Margaret only knew that both the dreadful catering service and her precious Milano's were owned by the same person. Me. My name is Sophia Chen, and 3 years ago, I committed the unforgivable sin of divorcing Margaret's precious son William. Not because of any scandal or drama, but simply because we'd grown apart. I wanted to build something of my own. He wanted a wife who'd be content hosting charity luncheons and looking pretty at board meetings. What the Wellingtons never knew was that I'd been building my empire long before the divorce. The catering company was just the visible part, my testing ground for new recipes and concepts. Behind the scenes, I'd been quietly acquiring and transforming struggling restaurants across the city. Milano's had been my first major acquisition. I kept the name but completely revamped the menu and operations, turning a failing Italian restaurant into the hottest chain in the Pacific Northwest. Not that anyone knew I owned it. All the paperwork was under my holding company's name. Sophia, Jenny, my assistant, appeared at my elbow. The kitchen needs you. There's an issue with the soufflés. I nodded, grateful for the excuse to step away from Margaret's voice. In the kitchen, my team worked with practiced efficiency, but I could see the tension in their shoulders. They'd all heard Margaret's comments throughout the night. Listen up, I said, gathering them around. I know this isn't easy, but remember, we're not just here to serve food. We're here to prove a point. Maria, my head chef, raised an eyebrow. Are you finally going to tell her? Not yet. I adjusted my chef's coat, but soon, very soon. The truth was, I'd been planning this moment for months. Margaret's campaign to blacklist my catering company from Seattle's social circle had actually done me a favor. It had pushed me to expand faster, think bigger. While she was busy badmouthing my little business, I'd been building a restaurant empire worth over $50 million. My phone buzzed. A text from William. Saw you in the kitchen. We should talk. I ignored it. William had been trying to talk ever since he found out I'd bought his favorite steakhouse last month. Not that he knew I owned it. He just wanted to complain about the menu changes. Mrs. Wellington is asking for more of the Milano's signature sauce, Jenny reported, returning from the dining room. She's telling everyone it's a secret family recipe that no other restaurant could possibly replicate. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. That sauce was my grandmother's recipe, the same one Margaret had once called too ethnic for her dinner parties. Through the kitchen doors, I could hear her holding court. Really, it's about standards. Some people, she shot a pointed look toward the kitchen, simply don't understand the level of excellence required in our circle. That's why I only trust Milano's for my important events. I checked my watch. In exactly 2 weeks, Margaret would be hosting the annual Wellington Family Foundation Gala, the biggest social event of the season. She'd been bragging about having Milano's cater it for months. What she didn't know was that I had a surprise planned for that night, one that would finally show her exactly who she'd been underestimating all these years. Sophia, Jenny appeared again. The lawyer called. Everything's set for next week's board meeting. I nodded. The pieces were falling into place. Perfect. And the documents I asked for? All here. She handed me a thick folder. Are you sure about this timing? Absolutely. I started reviewing the papers. Margaret Wellington has spent 3 years trying to destroy my reputation in this city. It's time she learned who really runs things around here. The week before the Wellington Gala was a blur of meetings and preparations. I sat in my downtown office, reviewing the final documents for what I was about to do. The view of Puget Sound stretched out before me, gray waves matching my contemplative mood. The board meeting for Milano's is confirmed for tomorrow, Jenny said, setting a coffee on my desk. Margaret Wellington still thinks it's just a routine quarterly review. I smiled, picking up the latest financial reports. Under my ownership, Milano's had grown from 3 shriveling locations to 15 thriving restaurants across the Pacific Northwest. And now I was about to merge it with my other holdings, creating one of the largest restaurant groups in the region. My phone buzzed. William again. Mother's frantic about the gala menu. She says no one at Milano's is returning her calls. What's going on, Sophia? I ignored it, just like I'd ignored his last dozen messages. Let him worry. The intercom buzzed. Ms. Chen, your 2 o'clock is here. The Milano's executive team. Send them in. 6 people filed into my office, all looking nervous. They'd been running Milano's day-to-day operations while I remained the silent owner. Only they knew who really signed their paychecks. As you know, I began tomorrow's board meeting will announce some significant changes. I want to make sure we're all clear on how this will play out. I laid out the plan, watching their faces as they realized what was about to happen. The merger would make headlines, especially given who would be affected. Mrs. Wellington, my CFO, said carefully, she'll be there tomorrow? Oh yes. I leaned back in my chair. As a special guest. After all, she's our most vocal supporter. Later that evening, as I was leaving the office, I ran into exactly the person I'd been avoiding. William stood by the elevator, his expensive suit a reminder of the life I'd left behind. Sophia, he said, stepping forward. We need to talk. About what, William? How your mother's been trying to destroy my business, or about how you've done nothing to stop her? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. Look, you know how mother gets. But these changes at Milano's, they're causing her real distress. She's planned this gala for months, and it will be perfectly catered, I assured him. Just maybe not quite the way she expects. His eyes narrowed. What are you planning? You'll find out tomorrow, along with everyone else. The next morning, I dressed carefully in my power suit, Chanel, black, impeccable. Margaret wasn't the only one who knew how to make an impression. The Milano's boardroom was filled by the time I arrived. Margaret sat near the front, radiating self-importance. She'd been invited as a valued customer to provide feedback on recent changes. She didn't even look at me as I walked in. The chairman stood to begin the meeting. Before we discuss regular business, we have a special announcement. Over the past 3 years, Milano's has undergone significant transformation under new ownership. Today, we're announcing a merger that will create the largest restaurant group in the Pacific Northwest. Margaret perked up, probably already planning how to brag about her connection to such a prestigious company. I'd like to introduce the owner who has guided this transformation, Ms. Sophia Chen. The silence was absolute as I walked to the podium. Margaret's face went through a fascinating series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally horror. This is impossible, she sputtered. She runs a catering company. Actually, I smiled. I run several businesses. The catering company, Milano's, and as of today, the new Chen restaurant group, which will include 28 locations across 3 states. I clicked to the next slide, showing the combined revenue figures. Margaret's face had gone pale. Of course, I continued. This merger means some changes in how we operate. For instance, we'll be reviewing all our regular client relationships, ensuring they align with our company values. Margaret stood up so quickly her chair toppled backward. You planned this? All of it? Planned what? I asked innocently. To build a successful business? Yes, I did. To watch you praise my restaurants while trying to destroy my catering company? That was just an amusing bonus. The night of the Wellington Gala arrived clear and cold. I stood in the kitchen of the Four Seasons ballroom, watching my team prepare what would be a very special menu. After the board meeting revelation, Margaret had tried desperately to cancel Milano's catering contract for the gala. But ironically, the same ironclad contracts she'd always praised them for now worked against her. Breaking it this late would have meant hefty penalties and, more importantly, social embarrassment. Everything's ready, Maria announced, putting the finishing touches on the appetizers. Should we serve them exactly as planned? I smiled, adjusting my chef's coat. Tonight, instead of hiding in the kitchen, I would be front and center. Exactly as planned. Let's show Seattle what we can really do. The ballroom was filled with the city's elite, all drawn by the Wellington family name. Margaret stood by the entrance, greeting guests with a fixed smile that looked more like a grimace. When she saw me emerge from the kitchen in my pristine chef's coat with executive chef, Chen Restaurant Group embroidered in gold, her smile cracked completely. What are you doing? She hissed as I approached. You can't be out here. Actually, I can. It's in the contract. The executive chef personally oversees all premium events. I gestured to the approaching servers. Ah, here come the appetizers. I believe you'll recognize them. The servers presented trays of elegantly plated bites, all signature dishes from Milano's, but with subtle twists that elevated them further. These are Milano's recipes, Margaret protested. You can't. They're my recipes. I corrected her gently. Every dish you've praised at Milano's for the past 3 years. They were all mine. That secret family sauce you love so much? My grandmother's recipe. The color drained from her face as guests began sampling the food, exclaiming over the familiar yet enhanced flavors. Oh, Margaret, one of her society friends called out. These are even better than usual. Did Milano's get a new chef? Before Margaret could respond, I stepped forward. Actually, I'm the chef who's been developing Milano's menu for the past 3 years. Sophia Chen, executive chef and CEO of the Chen Restaurant Group. The woman's eyes widened with recognition. Chen, weren't you? William's wife? Yes. Now I'm just the owner of his favorite restaurants. I turned to Margaret. Would you like me to explain how that spicy crab sauce is made? It's a family recipe after all, just not your family. She opened her mouth to respond but was interrupted by William's arrival. He looked between us, taking in the situation. Sophia, he said carefully, could we talk privately? I considered refusing, but curiosity won out. We stepped into a quiet corner of the ballroom. You've made your point, he said. You've humiliated Mother thoroughly. What more do you want? I laughed softly. You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about humiliation. It's about truth. For 3 years, your mother has tried to destroy my reputation, all while unknowingly praising my work. I'm just finally taking credit for what's mine. The merger announcement has already affected our family's standing. Your family's standing? I interrupted. What about my livelihood? The contracts your mother cost me? The lies she spread? He had the grace to look ashamed. I should have stopped her. Yes, you should have. But you didn't, and now here we are. I gestured to the room where guests were enthusiastically enjoying my food. I've built something remarkable, William, with or without the Wellington name. The evening continued, a masterclass in elegant revenge. Each course revealed another Milano's favorite, each presentation more spectacular than the last. Margaret was forced to watch as guest after guest praised the chef she'd spent years denigrating. The final blow came during dessert, as my team served my signature tiramisu, the same one Margaret had once declared the height of culinary sophistication. I clinked my glass for attention. I want to thank the Wellington Family Foundation for this opportunity. I announced to the room. In honor of tonight's event, the Chen Restaurant Group will be donating all proceeds from this evening to culinary education scholarships for underprivileged youth. The applause was thunderous. Margaret looked like she swallowed something sour. After all, what could be worse than her nemesis receiving a standing ovation at her own gala? Later that night, as the last guest departed, I found William waiting by the kitchen. "You know," he said quietly, "I always wondered why you chose restaurants over our life together." It wasn't about the restaurants, William. It was about being seen for who I am, not just who I married. I started to walk past him, then paused. "Your mother's sauce that you love so much, it's on the menu at my new bistro downtown. Feel free to stop by, if you can handle knowing who really makes it." 6 months later, the Chen Restaurant Group had become the talk of the Pacific Northwest culinary scene. Margaret had quietly stepped back from her social obligations, citing health concerns. My catering company was now the most sought-after service in Seattle. And William? He became a regular at my new bistro, always ordering the sauce he grew up loving. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about forcing them to face the truth they've been denying all along. As for me, I finally had everything I'd worked for: success, respect, and the satisfaction of knowing that every time Margaret Wellington craved her favorite restaurant's food, she'd have to swallow her pride along with it. Sometimes the sweetest victory isn't in the revenge itself. It's in the quiet moments afterward, when your enemies realize they've been wrong about you all along. The lawyer's office was uncomfortably quiet as Mr. Patterson read the last lines of my mother's supposed will. I watched my sister Olivia's perfect mask crack into a triumphant smile as she heard the words we'd all been waiting for. And to my eldest daughter, Diana, I leave nothing. Her choices and actions have proven she doesn't deserve any part of what I've built. Everything goes to my younger daughter, Olivia, who has always been the dutiful child I could rely on. My name is Diana Chin, and at 34, I was watching my sister's carefully orchestrated performance reach its climax. 3 months of preparation had led to this moment, and I had to admit, she played her part perfectly. "Diana," Mr. Patterson said, his voice thick with rehearsed sympathy, "your mother was very clear about her wishes. I know this must come as a shock." I kept my face carefully neutral, fighting back a smile. If they only knew what I'd discovered in Mother's study that rainy night in March. "It's not a shock," Olivia interjected, her voice dripping with fake concern. "It's been pulling away from the family for years. Mother was heartbroken about it. I thought about the real will safely stored in my safety deposit box, along with documentation that would destroy not just Olivia's inheritance claims, but her entire carefully constructed facade of the perfect daughter." "Is there anything you'd like to say, Diana?" Mr. Patterson asked, probably expecting tears or protests. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. "No, thank you. Mother's wishes seem quite clear." My calm response clearly wasn't what they expected. Olivia's perfectly plucked eyebrows drew together in confusion. Our family friends, gathered as witnesses, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Well then," Mr. Patterson continued, shuffling his papers, "we can proceed with the transfer of assets. Olivia, if you'll stay behind to sign some documents." I walked out of the office without looking back, but I could feel their stares. Poor Diana, they were probably thinking. Cut out of her mother's $50 million estate without a penny to show for years of family loyalty. If they only knew. 3 months earlier, I'd been working late in Mother's study. As her health declined, I'd taken over managing many of her business affairs, something that infuriated Olivia, though she'd never admit it openly. That night, I was searching for some old contract documents when I found something that changed everything. Tucked behind a loose panel in Mother's antique desk was a stack of papers that made my blood run cold. Bank statements showing systematic theft from Mother's accounts. Forged documents with poorly imitated signatures. And most damning of all, evidence that Olivia had been slowly poisoning our mother for months. The real will was there too, dated just 2 weeks before Mother's death, along with a letter addressed to me. "My dearest Diana, if you're reading this, then my suspicions about Olivia were correct. I've been gathering evidence, but I'm getting weaker by the day. The doctors can't explain it, but I know now. It's her. Your sister is poisoning me. I've changed my will to leave everything to you, but Olivia's been watching me too closely to file it officially. I trust you'll know what to do with this information. You were always the clever one, though you hide it better than your sister thinks." Be careful. She's more dangerous than we knew. All my love, Mother. That night changed everything. Instead of confronting Olivia immediately, I did what Mother taught me. I planned. I watched. I gathered more evidence. While Olivia played the devoted daughter, I documented every suspicious bank transfer, every mysterious payment, every unexplained withdrawal from Mother's accounts. I hired private investigators to track her movements and connections. Most importantly, I let her think she was winning. Now walking out of the lawyer's office, I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to Detective Sarah Martinez. It's done. She took the bait. My phone buzzed almost immediately with her response. Team in position. Meeting in 20. I headed to my car, catching a glimpse of my reflection in the window. I looked calm, composed, nothing like someone who'd just been disinherited. Mother would have been proud. The cafe where I met Detective Martinez was quiet this time of morning. She was already there, a thick file on the table in front of her. Your sister signed everything? She asked as I sat down. I nodded, ordering coffee from the hovering waitress. Every fake document exactly as we planned. Mr. Patterson played his part perfectly. He didn't have much choice, Sarah said grimly. Not after we showed him evidence of his involvement in Olivia's earlier schemes. That had been a shocking discovery. Our family's trusted lawyer, helping Olivia embezzle from Mother's accounts for years. But it had worked to our advantage. Facing serious criminal charges, he'd agreed to cooperate. How much time do we have before she realizes something's wrong? I asked. Sarah checked her watch. The bank should be calling her within the hour. All those accounts she thinks she's inheriting. Frozen. Every property she's planning to sell. Already transferred to your name, per your mother's real will. I sipped my coffee, thinking about the moment ahead when Olivia would realize her perfect plan had backfired. And the evidence of the poisoning? Rock solid. The toxicology reports confirmed everything. Your mother's tissue samples showed elevated levels of thallium, slow acting, hard to detect unless you're looking for it. We found traces in her makeup, her medications, even her favorite tea. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth as I thought about Mother's slow decline. How many of us had dismissed her symptoms as natural aging? How long had Olivia been planning this? There's something else, Sarah said, pulling out another document. We found connections to 2 other suspicious deaths. Wealthy older women, both with daughters who suddenly came into large inheritances. Olivia appears in their social circles just months before each death. My hands clenched around my coffee cup. She's done this before. Sarah nodded grimly. We think your mother was her 3rd victim. But this time she got sloppy. This time she left evidence. My phone buzzed. A text from Olivia. Lunch tomorrow? We should talk about the house. Right on schedule, I murmured, showing Sarah the message. She'll want to convince me to move out quickly before she sells it. Perfect. That gives us time to set up surveillance. When she realizes the accounts are frozen, she'll probably try to access her backup plans. We need to track everything. I thought about the cameras already installed throughout the house. The recording devices hidden in strategic locations. Olivia had no idea she'd been under surveillance for months. There's one thing I don't understand, Sarah said as we prepared to leave. Why did your mother hide the evidence instead of going to the police directly? I smiled sadly, because she knew Olivia would see it coming. This way, she never suspected anything. Mother gave her just enough rope to hang herself. As if on cue, my phone rang, Olivia's number flashing on the screen. Right on time, Sarah said, checking her watch. The bank must have made the call. I let it ring, imagining Olivia's face as she learned that every account she thought she was inheriting was frozen pending a criminal investigation. That every property she'd planned to sell had already been transferred out of her reach. When are you bringing her in? I asked. We'll let her panic for a few hours first, Sarah replied. Let her make some suspicious moves. The more evidence we have, the better. I thought about Mother's letter, hidden away with the real will. She'd known exactly what she was doing, setting this trap for Olivia. While my sister thought she was cleverly orchestrating Mother's death and my disinheritance, she was actually documenting her own crimes. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Olivia. The bank must be mistaken. Call me immediately. I showed it to Sarah, who smiled grimly. Let the show begin. By evening, Olivia had called 17 times and sent 32 increasingly frantic text messages. I watched them pile up on my phone screen as I sat in Sarah's surveillance van outside our family home. Something's wrong. The latest text read, "All the accounts are frozen. Mr. Patterson isn't answering my calls. We need to talk now." Through the van's sophisticated audio equipment, we could hear Olivia pacing in Mother's study, her heels clicking frantically against the hardwood floors. She'd been making calls for hours, growing more desperate with each passing minute. "The money has to be somewhere," she was saying into her phone. "Check offshore accounts, numbered accounts, everything." A pause. "What do you mean you can't access anything?" "I'm the sole heir. I have every right to." Sarah adjusted her headphones. "She's getting sloppy, making mistakes. Listen to how she's incriminating herself." I nodded, thinking about how carefully Olivia had always maintained her image: the perfect daughter, successful businesswoman, grieving sister. Now that facade was cracking. My phone lit up again, this time with a message that made my breath catch. "I know what you did, Di. Mother told me about your little investigations before she died. If you think you can take what's rightfully mine." Sarah leaned over to read the message. "That's interesting. She's trying to bluff, but she's actually admitting she had conversations with your mother near the end." "Conversations where Mother was supposedly telling her about me," I added. "Which we know never happened, because Mother was documenting Olivia's actions instead." Inside the house, Olivia's voice rose sharply. "The safety deposit box too. How is that possible?" "I have the only key." Sarah smiled grimly. "She's just discovered her secret stash is gone. The one where she kept the poison and the forged documents. I thought back to the day we'd accessed that safety deposit box, using the warrant Sarah had obtained. The evidence we found there had been damning: detailed notes about thallium poisoning, practice sheets of Mother's signature, even records of her previous victims. Mrs. Chen, one of Sarah's junior detectives, stuck his head into the van. "We've got movement on her overseas accounts. She's trying to transfer everything out." "Right on schedule," Sarah said, checking her watch. "Let's give her one more hour. Let her really panic." As we waited, I thought about Mother's last months. How many times had I visited, never suspecting that Olivia was slowly killing her? The mysterious symptoms, the constant fatigue, the mental confusion. We'd all attributed it to age and illness. All except Mother. She'd known, or at least suspected. And instead of confronting Olivia directly, she gathered evidence, planned her counterattack, and trusted me to finish what she'd started. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a series of messages. "You think you're so clever. Did you really think I wouldn't have a backup plan? Remember what happened to Mother when people got in my way?" Sarah read the messages over my shoulder and nodded to her team. "That's enough. We've got her threatening you in writing. Time to move." Everything happened quickly after that. Police cars silently surrounded the house. Sarah's team took up positions at every exit. Through our surveillance feed, we could see Olivia and Mother's study, frantically shredding documents. "Miss Chen." Sarah turned to me. "Would you like to do the honors?" I took a deep breath and called my sister. She answered on the first ring. "Finally, Diana, everything's gone wrong. The accounts, the properties." "I know," I said calmly. "That's because Mother left everything to me in her real will. The one she wrote after she discovered you were poisoning her." The silence on the other end was deafening. "What?" Olivia finally whispered. "The will reading today was a trap, Olivia. Every document you signed was actually a confession. Every account you tried to access has been tracked. We know about the other women too, Mrs. Anderson and Mrs. Pierce. Did you really think you could kill 3 wealthy women the same way and no one would notice?" "You're lying," she hissed, but I could hear the fear in her voice. "Check the window," I said quietly. I watched through the surveillance feed as she walked to the study window and saw the police cars. Watched her perfectly maintained composure finally shatter. "You really should have paid more attention," I continued. "While you were playing the perfect daughter, Mother was documenting everything. And after she died, I continued her work. Every conversation you had about the accounts, every meeting about selling the properties, every attempt to access your poison stash, it's all been recorded." "Diana," her voice took on a pleading tone, "we can work something out. I'm your sister." "You killed our mother," I said flatly. "Slowly poisoned her while pretending to care for her. Just like you killed those other women. There's nothing to work out." Through the window, I could see her reaching for her desk drawer, where we knew she kept a gun. "I wouldn't," I said quickly. "The house is surrounded. There's nowhere to go." "How?" she whispered. "How did you know?" "Because Mother told me. In the letter she left with her real will, the one you never found because you were too busy forging the fake one. She knew what you were doing, Olivia. She just needed proof." Sarah gave the signal, and her team moved in. I watched through the feed as they entered the study, as Olivia was read her rights as the last pieces of her carefully constructed life fell apart. She looked straight at the hidden camera as they let her out, her eyes filled with a hatred I'd never seen before. She knew exactly where I was watching from. "Well," Sarah said, closing her laptop, "I'd say that went according to plan." Later that night, I sat in Mother's study. My study now, looking through the evidence she gathered. Her meticulous notes showed how long she'd suspected Olivia, how carefully she documented everything while appearing to be just another declining elderly woman. "Your sister underestimated both of us," she'd written in her final letter. "She thought I was too old to notice, too trusting to suspect. She thought you were too naive to see through her act. Let her keep thinking that, Diana. Let her believe she's won. That's when she'll make her mistakes." Mother had been right. Olivia's arrogance, her absolute certainty that she fooled everyone, had been her downfall. The investigation uncovered more than we'd initially suspected, besides Mrs. Anderson and Mrs. Pierce. There were two other potential victims, wealthy women whose deaths had initially been attributed to natural causes. Sarah's team was reopening those cases. Olivia's arrest made headlines. Socialite charged with Mother's murder. Serial killer in high society. Inheritance scheme turns deadly. The photos showed her being led out of the house, her perfect makeup smeared, her designer outfit wrinkled. Mr. Patterson faced charges too, the lesser ones in exchange for his cooperation. He provided details about how Olivia had blackmailed him into helping her, how they'd worked together to hide her financial crimes. The real will was validated by the courts. Mother had left everything to me, along with a responsibility I hadn't expected. Half of her estate was to be used to establish a foundation, one dedicated to investigating suspicious deaths of elderly people, particularly those involving potential inheritance fraud. Because Olivia can't be the only one, Mother had written. There must be others out there, taking advantage of those who trust them most. 1 year later, I sat in my office at the newly established Chen Foundation for Elder Justice. On my desk was a framed photo of Mother, taken long before Olivia began her poisoning scheme. She was smiling, vibrant, full of life. Sarah visited occasionally, keeping me updated on the case. Olivia had pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. The trial was set for next month. "Your mother would be proud," Sarah said during one visit. The foundation has already helped uncover 2 similar cases. I looked at Mother's photo and smiled. She knew what she was doing. Even at the end, she was 3 steps ahead of everyone. My phone buzzed. A message from the prison where Olivia was being held. "Your sister has requested a meeting." I deleted it without responding. There was nothing left to say between us. Olivia had chosen her path, and now she would face the consequences. The foundation kept me busy, and slowly the pain of Mother's death began to ease. Not the pain of losing her, that would never completely fade, but the pain of knowing how she'd suffered while gathering evidence against her own daughter. Sometimes I wondered if Olivia ever really loved any of us, or if we were just means to an end, sources of wealth to be eliminated when convenient. But those thoughts led nowhere useful. Instead, I focused on Mother's legacy. Not just the wealth she'd built, but the justice she'd sought even from her deathbed. She trusted me to finish what she'd started, to expose Olivia's crimes and protect others from similar fates. Every time the foundation helped another family uncover the truth about a suspicious death, every time we prevented another predator from targeting vulnerable elderly people, I felt Mother's presence. She turned her own murder into a trap for her killer, using her death to ensure that Olivia's crimes would finally be exposed. It was her final act of justice, and I was honored to carry it forward.
Hi, I'm Maya Chin, and this is the story of how my small family restaurant became one of the most exclusive dining spots in New York City, all because my in-laws couldn't resist tearing me down one last time. Cooking has always been my passion. Growing up in a modest Chinese-American household, I spent countless hours in our tiny kitchen, learning traditional recipes from my grandmother while adding my own contemporary twists. My parents wanted me to pursue a respectable career in medicine or law, but my heart belonged to the culinary arts. That's how I met James, my husband. He was a regular at the small Asian fusion restaurant where I worked as a sous chef. He'd come in 3 times a week, always ordering something different, always asking to compliment the chef. When we finally met, the connection was instant. He loved my innovative takes on traditional dishes, and I loved his genuine appreciation for culinary creativity. What I didn't love was his family. The Whittakers were old money, with a lineage that apparently traced back to the Mayflower, something his mother, Elizabeth, mentioned at every possible opportunity. His father, Richard, was a real estate mogul who owned half the commercial properties in Manhattan's Upper East Side. And his sister, Victoria, was a social media influencer who'd never worked a day in her life, but somehow had 3 million followers on Instagram. From the moment James introduced me, they made it clear I wasn't their kind of people. A chef? Elizabeth had said, her voice dripping with disdain. How quaint. But James stood by me, and we got married despite their objections. I thought time would heal the rift, that proving myself as a loving wife would eventually win them over. I was wrong. 5 years into our marriage, I decided to pursue my dream. With our savings and a small inheritance from my grandmother, I opened Fusion Garden, a cozy restaurant that blended traditional Asian cuisine with modern American influences. James supported me completely, even though it meant living on a tighter budget while the restaurant found its footing. The first year was tough, as it is for any new restaurant. We had good days and bad days, but slowly, we were building a loyal customer base. Food critics were starting to take notice, and our weekend reservations were usually booked solid. It wasn't a Michelin star establishment, but it was mine, and I was proud of what we were creating. Then came last year's Thanksgiving. The Whittakers insisted on hosting the entire extended family, including me and James. Usually, I tried to avoid these gatherings, but James convinced me it would be good for business networking. Dad's friends are always looking for new places to host their business dinners, he said optimistically. I should have trusted my instincts. The evening started with the usual subtle jabs. Elizabeth commented on my simple dress, which cost 3 months of profits. Victoria asking if I needed recommendations for a good plastic surgeon. She knew a great one who fixed her nose. And Richard barely acknowledging my existence. But it was during dinner that everything fell apart. So Maya, Elizabeth started, swirling her wine glass with practiced elegance. James tells me you're little. The restaurant is still operating. How surprising. I felt James tense beside me. Yes, we're doing quite well, actually. Our weekend reservations are usually. Oh, darling. Victoria cut in, scrolling through her phone. I saw your reviews online. 3 stars? That's barely passing, isn't it? Actually, 3 stars on Michelin is. I tried to explain, but Richard interrupted. Let's be honest here, he said, putting down his fork with a loud clunk that silenced the table. We've all eaten there. The food is mediocre at best. No innovation, no style, just worthless food from a worthless chef who clearly doesn't understand fine dining. The table fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned to me, some with pity, others with poorly concealed amusement. Dad, James started, but I placed my hand on his arm. No, Richard's entitled to his opinion, I said quietly, standing up. Though I find it interesting that someone who thinks my food is worthless has reserved a table at Fusion Garden 6 times in the past month under different names. Elizabeth's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. "What's wrong, Elizabeth? Didn't think I'd recognize your husband when he came in wearing different suits, sitting at corner tables, taking detailed notes? Or did you think I wouldn't notice Victoria's anonymous food blogger friends coming in with their cameras?" Richard's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "We were merely conducting market research. The property your restaurant sits on is owned by the Chang Family Trust. I finished for him, my grandmother's family, not part of your real estate empire, and not for sale." The silence that followed was deafening. "Now, if you'll excuse me," I continued, placing my napkin on the table, "I have a restaurant to run. A worthless one, apparently, but it's mine." I walked out of that dining room with my head held high, ignoring Elizabeth's spluttering and Victoria's furious typing on her phone. James followed me to the car, apologizing profusely, but I barely heard him. Because during those painful minutes at the Whitaker family table, a plan had started forming in my mind. A plan that would take 6 months to execute, would cost me every favor I'd ever earned in the culinary world, and would ultimately change everything. They thought my food was worthless. Fine. They wanted to conduct market research. Perfect. They didn't think I understood fine dining. Oh, they had no idea what I was capable of. That night, as James slept, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my old mentor from culinary school, now a celebrated chef in Paris. The second was to a restaurant designer who owed me a favor. And the third was to a certain celebrity chef known for transforming restaurants. By morning, Operation Restaurant Revolution was in motion. The next 6 months would test everything I knew about cooking, business, and revenge. And the best part, the Whitakers would never see it coming. The next morning, I arrived at Fusion Garden earlier than usual. My staff could sense something had changed. There was a new energy in my movements, a spark in my eyes that hadn't been there before. They'd learn why soon enough. "Team meeting in 10 minutes," I announced, tying my apron with practiced precision. "Everyone needs to be there." And I mean everyone. As my staff gathered in the dining room, servers, line cooks, dishwashers, hosts, I took a deep breath and shared my vision. Over the next 6 months, we would transform Fusion Garden into something unprecedented in New York's culinary scene. But I needed their complete dedication and discretion. "What I'm proposing will be the hardest work you've ever done," I told them frankly. "Double shifts, late nights, endless practice. Some of you might want to leave, and I'll write glowing recommendations if you do. But if you stay," I smiled, "you'll be part of culinary history." To my amazement, not a single person left. They'd seen how I treated my staff, like family, better than my actual in-laws had ever treated me. They trusted me, and that trust was about to pay off. The next few months were a blur of activity, all conducted under absolute secrecy. The restaurant designer I'd called, Marcus, worked after hours, transforming our cozy dining room into something spectacular. We replaced every table, chair, and light fixture. The walls were redone in hand-painted murals depicting the fusion of Eastern and Western culinary traditions. The kitchen was completely reorganized and equipped with state-of-the-art equipment. My old mentor, Chef Jacques, flew in from Paris twice a month to help refine our techniques and train my staff. Together, we revolutionized every recipe on the menu, elevating each dish while maintaining the soul of the original concept. We weren't just making food. We were creating edible art. But the real game changer was my third call from that night, to Gordon Ramsay's team. I'd met Gordon briefly during my culinary school days, and he remembered my innovative dessert fusion that won a national competition. When I explained my situation and my vision, he was intrigued enough to get involved. The plan was simple but ambitious. Gordon would feature Fusion Garden in a special episode of his new streaming series about revolutionary restaurants. But first, we had to become revolutionary. For 6 months, we operated on 2 tracks. During regular hours, we maintained our usual service, though with gradually increasing prices and limited availability of reservations. Richard continued his undercover visits, taking notes and looking smug. Victoria's blogger friends kept coming in, posting lukewarm reviews about our decent but uninspired offerings. But after hours, we were building something extraordinary. My staff trained relentlessly. Every dish was deconstructed and rebuilt. Every service pattern was choreographed to perfection. We weren't just preparing food, we were creating an experience. James watched all this with a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you sure about this?" he'd ask, seeing me return home exhausted at 3 a.m. "You don't have to prove anything to them." "This isn't about proving something," I'd reply. "This is about becoming something." Finally, after 6 months of preparation, we were ready. The restaurant closed for 2 weeks for renovations. Victoria immediately posted about how this was the beginning of the end for Fusion Garden. Richard was overheard at his country club betting on how long before we went bankrupt. Perfect. The night of our reopening, I made sure the Whittakers received a special invitation. Elizabeth's RSVP came back with a note about how they were so concerned about our struggles and would of course support family in difficult times. They arrived as a group: Richard, Elizabeth, Victoria, and several of their society friends. James met them at the door, playing his part perfectly. "Maya's in the kitchen," he said, sounding worried. "She's been acting strange lately." They sat at the best table, already smirking, ready to witness what they assumed would be my humiliation. Then the show began. The new Fusion Garden was unlike anything they'd ever seen. Each dish was a theatrical presentation of flavor and technique. Dim sum that levitated on magnetic plates. Soup served in hand-blown glass spheres that dissolved when touched. Traditional Chinese dishes deconstructed and rebuilt with molecular gastronomy techniques. And in the middle of service, right on cue, Gordon Ramsay walked into the kitchen. The dining room went silent as he emerged a few minutes later, sampling dishes, nodding approvingly. Camera crews captured everything, including the Whittakers' increasingly pale faces. "This," Gordon announced to the cameras, "is the future of fusion cuisine. Chef Maya has created something extraordinary here. Michelin should be calling any day now." Elizabeth's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. Victoria's phone livestream suddenly went quiet. Richard's face had turned that interesting shade of red again. Then I emerged from the kitchen, no longer in chef's whites, but in a designer dress, followed by some of the most renowned food critics in New York. They'd all been there incognito, scattered throughout the dining room. "The property offers are no longer necessary, Richard," I said quietly, stopping at their table. "Fusion Garden isn't for sale. In fact, we're expanding. That empty building next door, the one you've been trying to buy for years. I closed on it this morning. We're opening a culinary school. You can't." Richard sputtered. "Oh, and Elizabeth?" I continued. Those reservations you've been trying to make under different names. We're booked solid for the next year. But don't worry, I've saved a permanent table for my family. I smiled sweetly. Right next to the kitchen, where you can smell everything, but taste like anything. The episode aired 3 months later. Fusion Garden became the hottest reservation in New York overnight. We earned our first Michelin star within 6 months, with rumors of a second on the way. The culinary school opened, focusing on fusion cuisine and innovative techniques. The Whittakers? They still come in sometimes, sitting at their assigned table by the kitchen, watching as I live my dream. Victoria's followers love her posts about her talented sister-in-law. Elizabeth brags at her social clubs about how she always saw my potential. Richard even offered to invest in my next venture. I declined, of course. Some things, like self-respect and true passion, are worth more than money or social status. My grandmother taught me that, along with her recipes that started this whole journey. James and I are expecting our first child now. Yesterday, I felt the baby kick while I was developing a new dessert menu. I placed my hand on my belly and whispered, "Remember this, little one. Success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right." The kitchen timer dings, and I have to go. There's a new fusion dish I'm working on, combining my grandmother's secret xiao long bao recipe with a French soufflé technique. The critics will love it. But more importantly, I love it. And in the end, that's what makes anything truly worthless or priceless, not what others say about it, but what you know it's worth. As I head back to my kitchen, I pass the Whittakers' table. It's empty tonight, but the reservation sign is still there, a small reminder of how far I've come. Some might call it petty, keeping that table as a monument to their disdain. I call it seasoning, that extra pinch of satisfaction that makes success taste even sweeter.
I should have known Rebecca would ruin everything. She always did. But that night, watching her chat with my colleagues at the company anniversary party, glass of champagne in hand, I actually believed she was happy for me. My name is Alexandra Martin, and I was about to become the youngest VP of operations at Turner & Associates. At 32, it was everything I'd worked for. The culmination of 10 years of late nights, missed weekends, and relentless dedication. To Alex, Rebecca raised her glass, her designer dress catching the light. My brilliant big sister. Who would have thought that the girl who used to eat paste in kindergarten would end up here? Everyone laughed. Even my husband David, standing beside me, chuckled at the gentle ribbing. But there was something in Rebecca's smile that should have warned me. A sharp edge beneath the sweetness, like a razor blade wrapped in silk. I'd seen that look before, when she accidentally spilled red wine on my prom dress, when she told my college boyfriend I'd been cheating on him, when she convinced our parents to use my wedding fund for her startup idea instead. But this was different. I was different. At 32, I had finally built something she couldn't touch. A career I'd earned through merit, not manipulation. A marriage built on trust and understanding. I thought I was untouchable. I was wrong. The party was in full swing when I noticed Rebecca had disappeared. David was deep in conversation with some colleagues from accounting, and I was due to give my acceptance speech in 20 minutes. I headed to the ladies' room to touch up my makeup, my mind already on the words I'd practiced. That's when I heard Rebecca's voice, soft but clear, coming from around the corner. "I hate having to tell you this, David, but as your sister-in-law, as someone who cares about you, you deserve to know." I froze, my hand still reaching for the bathroom door. "Know what?" David's voice was guarded. "Rebecca, if this is about Alex." "It is." I found something. On her phone. She left it unlocked at lunch last week, and I saw the messages. My heart stopped. What messages? I never left my phone unlocked, and I certainly hadn't had lunch with Rebecca in months. Messages? David's voice had dropped, taking on that quiet intensity I knew so well. What kind of messages? Between her and James, her boss. Rebecca's voice trembled with fake concern. "They've been seeing each other for months. The promotion, it's not just about her work performance. The silence that followed was deafening. I wanted to step around that corner, to confront her lies, but my feet wouldn't move. This couldn't be happening. Not again. Not now. I have screenshots, Rebecca continued. I sent them to your phone. I'm so sorry, David. I know this must be devastating. I heard footsteps, David's, walking away quickly. Finally, I forced myself to move, to round that corner and face my sister. She was still standing there, phone in hand, that same sweet smile on her face. When she saw me, her eyes widened in mock surprise. Oh, Alex, I was just destroying my life. I finished for her, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage building inside me. Again? She had the audacity to look hurt. I'm protecting David. He deserves to know the truth. What truth? I stepped closer, my hands shaking. Those messages are fake, Rebecca. You and I both know it. Her smile didn't waver. Do we? The timestamps match your late nights at the office. The pet names, the secret meetings. It's all there. And really, who would believe you didn't sleep your way to the top? A VP position at your age? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A message from David. Don't come home tonight. Or any night. I can't even look at you. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. In the main ballroom, I could hear James, my boss, beginning the promotion announcement. But it didn't matter anymore. In the space of 10 minutes, my sister had managed to destroy everything I built. Why? I whispered, looking up at her. What did I ever do to you? Rebecca's smile finally fell, revealing something darker underneath. You existed, she said simply. You were always the smart one, the successful one, the one everyone admired. Well, not anymore. She brushed past me, her expensive perfume lingering in the air. Better go tell James you won't be accepting that promotion after all. Sexual harassment scandals are so messy. I stood there frozen as my world crumbled around me. In the distance, I could hear applause as James announced my name. But all I could focus on was the message still glowing on my phone screen, and the realization that my sister had finally won. Or so she thought. Because what Rebecca didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that this time would be different. This time, I wouldn't just survive her betrayal. I would make her regret it. The next 5 years redefined everything I thought I knew about survival. The day after the party, I walked into James' office and resigned. His face showed confusion, then concern as I explained that I couldn't accept the promotion. I didn't tell him about Rebecca's lies. The shame was too fresh, too raw. David filed for divorce within a week. The evidence Rebecca had fabricated was thorough, doctored photos, fake text messages, even receipts from hotels I'd supposedly visited with James. My protest of innocence fell on deaf ears. After all, Rebecca was family. Why would she lie? I lost everything in the divorce. Our house, most of our friends, even our dog. David's lawyer painted me as an ambitious climber who'd do anything for success, including betraying my marriage. The irony was bitter. I'd worked so hard to earn everything honestly, only to be branded a cheat. But Rebecca had made one crucial mistake. In her eagerness to destroy my life, she'd forgotten to consider what I might do with nothing left to lose. I left Seattle behind, moving to Boston where an old college friend had connections at Milton and Green, a rising tech consulting firm. Starting over at 32 wasn't easy, but spite is a powerful motivator. I worked harder than ever, channeling my anger into excellence. This time, I was smarter. I kept detailed records of everything: emails, meetings, project successes. I made allies instead of friends, building a network of people who respected my work rather than my personality. And I watched from afar as Rebecca's life played out on social media. She married David 2 years after my divorce. I wasn't surprised. She'd always wanted what was mine. They looked happy in their photos, traveling the world, attending charity galas. Rebecca had finally gotten the life she thought she deserved. But I knew better than to trust appearances. Through my network, I kept tabs on her career moves. She'd started a tech company, SecureShare, using Dad's connections to secure initial funding. The company promised revolutionary blockchain security solutions, and Rebecca played her part well. The dynamic female founder disrupting a male-dominated industry. I almost admired her audacity. Almost. Then came the email I'd been waiting for, though I hadn't known it until that moment. A message from Rebecca herself, arriving late one Tuesday evening as I sat in my corner office at Milton and Green, where I just made partner. Dear Alex, I hope this email finds you well. I know we haven't spoken in years and I understand why, but I'm reaching out because I believe we can help each other. SecureShare is expanding and we're looking for strategic investors for our Series B funding round. Your reputation in the tech consulting world is impressive. I've followed your success from afar and I'm proud of what you've accomplished. We're offering early access to this investment opportunity to a select group of individuals. Given your expertise and our family connection, I wanted to extend this offer personally. The potential returns are substantial. We're projecting 300% growth over the next 2 years. I know our past is complicated, but perhaps this could be a fresh start for us as sisters and business partners. Let me know if you'd like to discuss further. Best regards, Rebecca. I read the email 3 times, each word burning into my brain. The sheer audacity of it, reaching out after 5 years as if she hadn't systematically destroyed my life. And yet, I opened my laptop and began researching SecureShare more thoroughly. The company had grown rapidly, but something about their financials didn't add up. The projected growth figures were too perfect, the client testimonials too polished. I made some calls to former colleagues in Seattle who still owed me favors. Within days, I had a clearer picture of what Rebecca had built and what she was trying to hide. SecureShare was a house of cards, built on manipulated data and empty promises. The blockchain technology they claimed to have developed was mostly smoke and mirrors. They were burning through investor money at an alarming rate, and Rebecca was desperately seeking new funding to keep the charade going. She needed my investment not just for the money, but for the legitimacy my name would bring. My success in tech consulting would encourage other investors, buying her more time to maintain her facade. I leaned back in my chair, a smile spreading across my face as I crafted my reply. Dear Rebecca, thank you for reaching out. You're right, it has been a long time. I'd love to discuss this investment opportunity in person. Perhaps we could meet in Boston next week. Looking forward to reconnecting. Best, Alex. Her response came within minutes, eager and relieved. We arranged to meet at my office the following Tuesday. As I confirmed the meeting, I felt a familiar sensation, that same cold fury that had driven me for the past 5 years. But now it was tempered with something else, anticipation. Because what Rebecca didn't know was that I'd spent those years building more than just a new career. I'd built a trap, and she was walking right into it. Rebecca arrived at my office exactly on time, dressed in a Chanel suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her smile was the same one I remembered from that night 5 years ago, sweet but sharp around the edges. Alex, she moved to hug me, but I stepped back, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. Her smile flickered but didn't fade. You look different. Success suits you. I sat down, studying her. Up close, I could see the cracks in her perfect facade, the slight tremor in her hands, the tension around her eyes. She was desperate, though trying hard not to show it. Let's skip the small talk, I said, opening my laptop. Tell me about SecureShare's financials. For the next hour, I listened as Rebecca presented her company's story. The pitch was polished, full of buzzwords and promises of revolutionary technology, but beneath the surface, I could hear the desperation growing in her voice. We're projecting significant growth, she said, pulling up a sleek presentation. With this round of funding. You mean with my money? I interrupted quietly. She paused, then smiled. Well, yes. Your investment would be crucial. We're offering you an incredible opportunity here, Alex. A chance to be part of something revolutionary. I nodded slowly, then turned my laptop around to face her. Something revolutionary, like these financial records? The color drained from her face as she recognized the internal documents displayed on my screen. Documents that showed the truth about SecureShare's hollow promises and missing funds. How did you get these? I finished for her. I have friends in interesting places, Rebecca. Friends who are very good at finding things people want to hide. Those documents are confidential, she said, her voice shaking slightly. You have no right. Like you had no right to destroy my marriage? My career? I kept my voice steady, watching her squirm. The difference is, these documents are real, unlike those fake messages you showed David 5 years ago. She straightened in her chair, attempting to regain control. That's ancient history, and you can't prove anything about those messages. Actually, I can. I opened another file. See, while you were busy playing startup founder, I had experts analyze those screenshots. They found proof they were doctored. I have signed statements confirming the forgery. So what? Her mask finally cracked, showing the anger beneath. It doesn't matter now. David and I are married. You can't change that. I don't want to change that, I said quietly. What I want is for you to understand exactly what you're about to lose. I pressed a button on my desk phone. Send them in, please. The door opened and 3 people walked in. James Turner, my former boss from Seattle. Sarah Chin, the lead investigator from the SEC. And Michael Harrison, David's business partner. Rebecca's face went ash white. Ms. Martin, Sarah began formally, we've been investigating SecureShare for months. The evidence your sister provided confirms our suspicions of fraud, misappropriation of investor funds, and multiple securities violations. That's ridiculous, Rebecca stammered, but Michael cut her off. Save it, Rebecca. I've already spoken to David about this. The firm is severing all ties with SecureShare. We can't risk being associated with fraud. James simply stood there, arms crossed, his presence a reminder of the career she tried to destroy. Rebecca turned to me, her composure completely shattered. You planned this, she whispered. All of it. The investment meeting, the investigation. Yes, I said simply, just like you planned to destroy my life 5 years ago. The difference is I didn't have to lie. Your own actions did all the work for me. I'll lose everything, she said, her voice breaking. The company, my reputation, David. Now you know how it feels. I stood up, gathering my papers. The SEC has questions for you. I suggest you answer them honestly, for once in your life. As Rebecca was led away for questioning, I sat back down at my desk, feeling strangely empty. The revenge I planned for 5 years was complete, but it brought less satisfaction than I'd expected. Later that evening, as I stood at my office window watching the Boston skyline, my phone buzzed with a text from David. I just heard about Rebecca, about everything. I'm sorry I didn't believe you back then. I didn't respond. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. A week later, the story broke in the business press. SecureShare's collapse was spectacular, taking Rebecca's reputation with it. She faced criminal charges for investor fraud, and David filed for divorce after learning the full extent of her deceptions. I watched it all from a distance, neither celebrating nor mourning. In the end, Rebecca's downfall wasn't really about revenge. It was about justice, about showing her that actions have consequences, that the truth eventually comes to light. My new corner office at Milton and Green felt different after that day. The view was the same, but the weight I'd carried for 5 years had lifted. I'd proven something not just to Rebecca, but to myself, that success built on truth would always outlast success built on lies. Sometimes at night, I still think about that company party 5 years ago, about the sister who thought she could take everything from me. She never understood that by trying to destroy me, she gave me the strength to rebuild something stronger. In the end, Rebecca's greatest mistake wasn't in betraying me. It was in underestimating what I would become because of that betrayal. The last I heard, she had moved back in with our parents, her dreams of success shattered by her own deceptions. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks about that night too, if she regrets the choices that led her here. But mostly, I focus on my own path forward. Because while Rebecca's story ended in ruins, mine was just beginning. And this time, I was writing it on my own terms. I still remember that rainy Tuesday morning when my world fell apart. After 8 years of marriage, I came home from my night shift at the local diner to find the locks changed and my belongings in garbage bags on the front porch. My hands trembled as I called my husband David, only to hear his cold voice. It's over, Sarah. I've moved on. Don't try to come back. I stood there, rain soaking through my waitress uniform, staring at the house we bought together. Well, the house I bought, technically, my inheritance from my beloved grandfather had paid for the down payment, but David's name was on all the paperwork. I trusted him completely when he said it was easier that way with his credit score. What a fool I'd been. My phone buzzed again. A text notification from our joint bank account. Balance, $0. 8 years of savings gone. My separate account, also emptied. He'd had access to everything because I'd trusted him. Because I believed in our marriage. I didn't know then that this was just the beginning. With nowhere else to go, I loaded what I could into my old Honda Civic, the only thing still in my name, and drove to my mother-in-law Patricia's house. Maybe there had been some mistake. Maybe she could help me understand what was happening. I should have known better. Patricia opened her door wearing her signature pearl necklace and disapproving frown. Behind her, I could see David's sister Amanda smirking. Well, Patricia said, looking down her nose at my wet, bedraggled appearance. I suppose you're here to beg for money now that David's finally seen sense. Patricia, please, my voice cracked. I don't understand what's happening. Everything's gone. The house, our savings. Oh, honey, she laughed, but there was no warmth in it. Did you really think someone like David would stay with a waitress forever? He's finally moving up in the world, and he needs someone more suitable. She adjusted her designer watch. Though I must say, you lasted longer than I expected. Most gold diggers would have shown their true colors years ago. Gold digger? I whispered, stunned. I paid for our house. I supported him through his MBA. With your grandfather's money, Amanda chimed in. Which you've been lording over David for years. Well, now he's paid you back. Guess you'll have to find another rich old man to mooch off of. I stood there, rain mixing with my tears, as 8 years of memories rewrote themselves in my mind. All those family dinners where they'd subtly mocked my job. The way they dismissed my contribution to David's success. How they'd never accepted me, the poor girl from the wrong side of town who dared to marry into their precious family. Where is he? I asked, my voice stronger now. Where's David? On his honeymoon, Patricia said with a cruel smile. With Jessica. You remember her? His new executive assistant. They've been seeing each other for months. She comes from a good family, you know. She'll be much better at supporting David's career than you ever were. The world spun around me. Jessica. The woman he'd hired 6 months ago, who he'd insisted on working late with so often, who'd smiled sweetly at me at the company Christmas party while apparently sleeping with my husband. You knew. I realized, looking between Patricia and Amanda. You all knew he was cheating. Of course we knew. Amanda rolled her eyes. We helped him plan everything. Jessica's father is on the board of David's company. This marriage will do wonders for his career. Unlike you, who's been holding him back with your embarrassing little waitress job. Now, Patricia said, reaching for her door, I suggest you leave before I call the police. And don't bother trying to fight this in court. Our family lawyer has everything handled. You signed a prenup, remember? You'll get nothing. The door slammed in my face, leaving me alone in the rain once again. That night, I slept in my car in a Walmart parking lot, too shocked and broken to even cry. The next day, I tried to check into a cheap motel, only to find my credit cards canceled. My phone was next. Apparently, it had been on David's plan. Within 48 hours, I had nothing but my car, the clothes in my garbage bags, and $237 in cash. I managed to find a bed at the local women's shelter. The irony wasn't lost on me. I volunteered here for years, never imagining I'd end up staying here myself. The shelter director, Grace, remembered me from my volunteer days and gave me a private room usually reserved for emergency cases. You're in shock, Sarah, she said gently, bringing me a cup of tea. But you're stronger than you know, and when you're ready, we'll help you fight back. I didn't believe her then. How could I fight back? David had taken everything, planned it all perfectly. He had his family's money, their lawyers, their connections. I was just a waitress with a worthless degree in social work, trying to make ends meet while supporting my husband's dreams. But Grace was right about one thing. I was in shock, so much so that I almost missed the most important detail of all, a detail that would change everything. It happened 3 days into my stay at the shelter. I was helping in the shelter's kitchen. I couldn't afford to pay for my stay, but I could at least cook when I heard excited whispers from the front office. The CEO of Montgomery Industries is here. What's Alexander Montgomery doing at our shelter? I heard he's doing a series of surprise visits to local charities. I froze, nearly dropping the pot I was holding. Montgomery Industries, David's company, the place he'd worked his way up to middle management, always complaining that he deserved more recognition, faster promotions. I'd never met anyone from his work. He'd always said I wouldn't fit in at corporate events. But I knew about Alexander Montgomery. Everyone in town did. The brilliant young CEO who'd taken over his father's company 5 years ago and transformed it into a tech giant. The businessman who put our small city on the map. The man who, if the gossip was true, had no patience for dishonesty or corruption in his company. Before I could decide whether to hide in the kitchen, Grace came rushing in. "Sarah, Mr. Montgomery is asking to speak with all our residents. He's making a large donation and wants to hear their stories firsthand. Would you be comfortable joining the group?" I looked down at my shelter-provided clothes, touched my unwashed hair. I don't know, Grace. I'm not really presentable." "Nonsense," she said firmly. "You're one of us now, and your story deserves to be heard." So that's how I found myself sitting in a circle with 15 other shelter residents, facing Alexander Montgomery himself. He wasn't what I expected. Younger than I'd imagined, maybe in his mid-30s, wearing a simple button-down shirt and slacks. No fancy suit, no arrogant attitude. He listened intently to each woman's story, asking thoughtful questions, taking notes. Then it was my turn. "I'm Sarah," I said quietly. "I'm here because my husband emptied our accounts and changed the locks while I was at work. He works for your company, actually." Alexander Montgomery's head snapped up, his pen freezing mid-note. "What did you say?" I couldn't stop now. The whole story poured out. The 8 years of marriage, supporting David through his MBA, buying our house with my inheritance, discovering his affair with his executive assistant, his family's cruel dismissal. "He's David Chen." I finished, my voice barely a whisper. "In middle management, he just married Jessica Williams. Her father is on your board." The room was dead silent. Alexander Montgomery's face had gone completely still, his eyes intense. "David Chen," he repeated slowly. "The one who's been pushing for a senior director position, who's been claiming his wife is fully supportive of his career moves." I laughed bitterly. Supportive? I didn't even know he was divorcing me until I found my belongings in garbage bags. "Grace," Alexander said suddenly, standing up. "May I use your office for a moment? Mrs. Chen and I need to have a private conversation." "It's Ms. Miller now," I corrected quietly. "I'm going back to my maiden name." He nodded, a strange expression crossing his face. "Ms. Miller, then. Please, come with me." As I followed him to Grace's office, I had no idea that this conversation would change everything. That within 24 hours, David's perfectly planned new life would begin to crumble. And it would all start with 5 simple words from Alexander Montgomery. "I've been looking for you." I followed Alexander Montgomery into Grace's small office, my heart pounding. He closed the door and turned to face me, his expression intense. "5 years ago," he said, "did you write a business proposal for a corporate-sponsored chain of community resource centers?" My mouth fell open. "How did you?" "It crossed my desk when I first became CEO," he continued. "Brilliant concept, combining job training, childcare, and social services in economically disadvantaged areas. The financial projections were sound. The community impact analysis thorough. But when I tried to contact the author, Sarah Miller, she vanished. The email bounced back, the phone number was disconnected. I sank into a chair, memories flooding back. That was right after I married David. He said the proposal was too amateur, that it would embarrass him at work. He made me take it down from all the submission portals. Said I should focus on supporting his career instead. Alexander's jaw tightened. "Do you know what happened to that proposal, Ms. Miller?" "Nothing, because your husband buried it. He accessed the company's submission system using his credentials and withdrew it without your knowledge. We found the digital trail during a system audit last year. We couldn't locate you." What? My voice shook. "But why?" "Because David Chen has been taking credit for other people's work for years. We've suspected, but couldn't prove it. He's very careful. Very manipulative." Alexander sat on the edge of Grace's desk. The proposal's withdrawal caught our attention because it was exceptional. I've been looking for its author ever since. Tears filled my eyes. All those nights I'd worked on that proposal, dreaming of making a difference. All while David was apparently sabotaging me. "There's more," Alexander said gently. 2 months ago, David presented a modified version of your proposal to the board. Claimed it was his original work, part of his bid for the senior director position. Jessica's father has been championing him for the role. A bitter laugh escaped me. So that's why he chose now to leave. He finally found a way to use my work for his advancement. "Ms. Miller, Sarah." Alexander leaned forward. I'd like to offer you a job as director of our new community impact division. Your original proposal will be the foundation, but you'll have full resources to expand it. Starting salary is $250,000, plus benefits and stock options. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. But I'm just a waitress. No, he said firmly. You're a brilliant strategist who's been systematically undermined by an abusive husband. That ends today. He pulled out his phone. With your permission, I'd like to call our legal team. David Chen committed corporate fraud by stealing and misrepresenting your work. That's grounds for immediate termination. My head spun. But his new wife, her father. Board member or not, fraud is fraud. And something tells me Mr. Williams won't be so supportive once he learns the truth about his new son-in-law. Everything moved quickly after that. Alexander's legal team arrived within the hour. They took my statement, gathered evidence. By morning, the truth about David's fraud was exposed. He was fired publicly, his corporate accounts frozen. Jessica's father, horrified by the scandal, immediately annulled their marriage. I wasn't there when it happened, but Amanda later told me in a desperate attempt to reconcile once she realized I was now a company director, that David and Jessica returned early from their honeymoon to find their keycards deactivated and security waiting. How dare you? David had apparently shouted at Alexander in the lobby. Do you know who my new father-in-law is? Alexander corrected calmly. The marriage has been annulled, and Mr. Williams sends his regards, along with a recommendation that you find employment far, far away from our industry. That's when David saw me standing beside Alexander in a designer suit, a gift from the company's stylist. His face went white. Sarah? What are you doing here? Taking back what's mine, I said calmly. The proposal you stole, it's being implemented. The career you tried to destroy, it's flourishing. The woman you discarded, she's your new boss's right hand. Patricia and Amanda tried damage control, of course. Suddenly they were calling constantly, leaving tearful voicemails about family loyalty. But I had a new family now, the incredible team at Montgomery Industries, who welcomed my ideas and valued my contributions. The women's shelter where I'd stay became the pilot location for our first community resource center. Grace joined as program director. Within a year, we'd opened 10 more centers across the state. David, last I heard, he was working as a junior analyst in a small firm 3 states away. Jessica married a wealthy developer, and Patricia loves to complain about how her new daughter-in-law married down. As for me, well, that's another story. One that started with late nights working on center proposals with Alexander, strategy sessions that turned into dinner discussions, meetings that lingered long after the agenda was complete. I'm not him, Alexander said one evening as we watched the sunset from his office. I'll never try to dim your light. I know, I replied, because I did know. I learned the difference between someone who wants to possess you and someone who wants to see you soar. 2 years after that rainy day when my world fell apart, I stood in the grand ballroom of the Montgomery Industries headquarters. Hundreds of employees and community members gathered to celebrate the opening of our 15th resource center. And now, the MC announced, please welcome our Community Impact Director and newest board member, Mrs. Sarah Montgomery. As I took the podium, my wedding ring catching the light, nothing flashy. Alexander knows I prefer elegant simplicity. I saw my old mother-in-law in the crowd. Patricia had wrangled an invitation through a business contact, no doubt hoping to reconcile now that I'd married up. But I wasn't the same woman she dismissed in the rain. Meeting her eyes, I smiled and began my speech. 5 years ago, I wrote a proposal about the power of community support, about how everyone deserves a chance to rebuild, to grow, to shine. Today, we're not just opening another center. We're making that vision reality. I paused, my hand resting on my slightly rounded belly, our first child still our secret for a few more weeks. Sometimes, life's greatest betrayals lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Sometimes, losing everything means making room for everything you've ever dreamed of. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living your truth so boldly that those who tried to break you become nothing but a footnote in your success story. Alexander squeezed my hand as the room erupted in applause. And in that moment, I sent a silent thank you to David. His cruelty had freed me. His betrayal had led me here. I'd lost a husband who dimmed my light, but I found a partner who helped me shine. I'd lost a fake family who valued status, but I built a real one based on love and respect. Most importantly, I found myself, the woman who'd always been there, waiting to emerge. Strong, capable, unstoppable. That night, as Alexander and I drove home to our modest house, we could afford bigger. But I love this one's cozy garden, he asked. Any regrets? I touched my growing belly, thought of our expanding centers, our passionate team, our future together. Just one, I smiled. I should have checked the company submission portal years ago. He laughed, the sound warm in the quiet car. Everything happened exactly when it was supposed to. And you know what? He was right. Sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as its cruelest moments. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you never knew you were looking for. And sometimes a rainy Tuesday morning when your world falls apart becomes the first chapter of your greatest adventure. The screen of my iPhone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in 2 years. My hands trembled slightly as I stared at it, memories flooding back of that devastating night when everything fell apart. Mark's name flashed insistently, demanding attention just like he always had. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Hello? My voice was steady, calmer than I felt. Sarah? Mark's voice cracked. He sounded different, desperate, broken. Nothing like the confident man who'd walked out on me 2 years ago after gambling away everything we built together. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at 34, I was listening to my estranged husband cry into the phone after destroying our life savings and abandoning me with crushing debt. The irony wasn't lost on me. I've made a huge mistake, he sobbed. I should never have left. You have to let me explain. I gazed around my office, my real estate office, to be precise, taking in the awards lining the walls, the stack of closing documents on my desk, and smiled. 2 years ago, this conversation would have shattered me. Now it was just another Tuesday afternoon. Sure, Mark, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Let's meet. We can talk about everything. He exhaled sharply, relief evident in his voice. Really? God, Sarah, thank you. I knew you'd understand. You always understood. That's what he counted on. My understanding, my forgiveness, my tendency to see the best in people even when they showed me their worst. It's what had kept me with him through the small lies that became bigger, through the investment opportunities that drained our savings account, through the credit card debt he hid until it was too late. Cafe Luna, tomorrow at 2. I suggested, naming the coffee shop where he'd first told me about cryptocurrency, his eyes shining with dreams of quick riches. We can discuss everything there. Yes, perfect, he agreed quickly. I'll tell you everything, explain about the crypto market crash, about DeFi Max and how they promised. Tomorrow, Mark, I cut him off. We can talk about it all tomorrow. After hanging up, I leaned back in my chair, my mind drifting to that night 2 years ago. I'd come home from my job as a middle school math teacher to find Mark pacing our small apartment, his face ashen. It's gone, he'd said, his voice hollow. All of it. DeFi Max. The platform collapsed. They took everything. I'd stared at him, uncomprehending at first. What do you mean, everything? Our savings, the house down payment, the investment accounts, he'd swallowed hard. I thought I could double it, triple it, the returns they were promising. The room had started spinning as the magnitude of what he was saying hit me. Nearly $200,000. Every penny we'd saved over 8 years of marriage, gone in a crypto scam. But that wasn't even the worst part. There's more, he'd whispered, unable to meet my eyes. I took out some loans, credit cards in our names. I was trying to recover the losses, make it back before you noticed. $50,000 in credit card debt. He forged my signature, opened joint accounts, maxed them out chasing his crypto dreams. And now he was running away, leaving me to deal with the aftermath. I can't face this, he'd said, grabbing his pre-packed bag. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry. I'd watched him walk out, too stunned to cry, too numb to stop him. The next day, I'd learned he'd quit his job at the tech startup where he worked. His phone was disconnected. He'd vanished, leaving me with nothing but debt and broken promises. But that night, sitting among the ruins of our life together, something had shifted inside me. I'd always been good with numbers, had always understood the power of compound interest and smart investments. I tried to tell Mark that get-rich-quick schemes never worked. That patient, Strategic growth was the key to building wealth. He'd never listened. He wanted fast money, crypto millions, the excitement of high-risk trading. And now here I was at 32, starting over with less than nothing. The next morning, I called in sick to work and started making plans. First, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in debt and divorce cases. Then I called my brother Mike, who'd been in real estate for years. I need a change, I told him. I need to rebuild, and I need to do it my way. Mike had listened, really listened, as I laid out my plan. I'd always helped him with the financial aspects of his real estate deals, understanding market analysis and investment potential. Now I wanted to do it myself. You'd be great at it, he'd said. But what about the teaching job? The benefits, the stability? I'll keep teaching for now, I'd replied. But nights, weekends, I'm going to study for my real estate license. I'm going to learn everything I can about property investment, about building real wealth. And I did. For 6 months, I worked my teaching job, studied real estate in every spare moment, and systematically negotiated with creditors to manage the debt Mark had left me with. I lived on rice and beans, sold everything I could, and put every extra penny toward paying down those credit cards. I got my real estate license on a Wednesday. By Friday, I had my first listing through Mike's connections. A month later, I had 3 more. It turned out my teaching skills translated perfectly to real estate. I could break down complex market data for clients, help them understand their options, guide them through the biggest purchase of their lives. Within a year, I paid off half the credit card debt through commissions and careful budgeting. 6 months after that, I opened my own boutique real estate firm specializing in investment properties and first-time homebuyers. I understood their fears, their dreams of building something secure. I'd lived it. Now, sitting in my office 2 years after Mark walked out, I was debt-free and running a successful business. My firm had just closed its 100th deal, and I had a waiting list of clients drawn to my reputation for honest, strategic investment advice. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I have so much to tell you." I smiled, picking up the manila envelope on my desk, the one I'd been saving for just this moment. Inside were documents that would show Mark exactly what I'd built while he was chasing crypto fantasies. Tomorrow at Cafe Luna, he'd learn that sometimes the slow, steady path was the one that led to real success. And maybe, just maybe, he'd finally understand what he'd walked away from. I opened my laptop and pulled up the latest property listings. I had a client meeting in an hour, a young couple looking to buy their first home. They'd saved carefully, done their research, and were ready to build their future the right way. Cafe Luna hadn't changed much in 2 years. The same rustic wooden tables, the same artisanal coffee menu, the same large windows overlooking downtown. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a table in the corner where Mark and I had once planned our future overlaps and dreams. I set my leather portfolio on the table, along with the manila envelope. My real estate company's logo, Mitchell Properties, was embossed in gold on both. A small detail, but one I knew wouldn't escape Mark's notice. He walked in at exactly 2 p.m., and I barely recognized him. Gone was the designer suit, the expensive watch, the carefully styled hair. Instead, he wore wrinkled chakis and a faded polo shirt that had seen better days. His face was thinner, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Sarah," he breathed, stopping short when he saw me. "You look amazing." I did look good, I knew that. Success had given me a confidence that no designer clothes could match. My navy blazer and silk blouse weren't just expensive. They were earned. "Sit down, Mark," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Would you like some coffee?" He slumped into the seat, running a hand through his unkempt hair. I actually can't afford." "I'll get it," I cut in, signaling the barista. "Still take your Americano with an extra shot." He nodded, looking almost ashamed. Once our drinks arrived, we sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 2 years hanging between us. "Sarah," he started. "Let me go first," I interrupted, opening my portfolio. "Before you tell me whatever you came to say, I want to show you something." I pulled out a series of photographs, laying them on the table one by one. Beautiful homes, modern office buildings, luxury apartments, all properties I'd helped clients buy or sell over the past 2 years. "These are just a few of my recent deals," I said calmly. "Mitchell Properties specializes in investment real estate. We've closed over 100 transactions in the past year alone. Mark's eyes widened as he looked at the photos, then at me, then back at the photos. Mitchell Properties. You started your own company? I nodded, pulling out more documents. After you left, I had two choices. I could let your mistakes destroy me, or I could rebuild. I chose to rebuild. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee. The debt? I know I left you with $50,000 in credit card debt. I finished for him. Yes, you did. Would you like to see how I handled that? From the manila envelope, I extracted a stack of credit card statements, all stamped paid in full and red ink. I laid them out one by one, watching his face as realization dawned. That's impossible, he whispered. How did you? The same way anyone builds real wealth, Mark. Hard work, smart investments, and patience. No crypto scams, no get-rich-quick schemes. Just strategy and dedication. I pulled out my company's latest financial statement. Mitchell Properties is now worth more than we ever had in savings. The difference is, this wealth is real. It's built on actual property, actual transactions, actual value. Mark slumped in his chair, his coffee untouched. I don't know what to say. When everything crashed with Defimax, I thought, I couldn't face you. I couldn't face anyone. So you ran, I said, my voice steady but cold. You left me to deal with the debt, the creditors, the shame. Do you know what that was like, Mark? Having to explain to everyone why my husband had disappeared. He flinched at my words. I was a coward, he admitted. I've spent the last 2 years trying to recover, trying to make it back, but everything I touched turned to dust. Every investment, every opportunity. Because you're still looking for the easy way, I said, pulling out one final document. You haven't learned anything. What's that? He asked, eyeing the paper warily. Divorce papers, I replied, sliding them across the table. Already filled out, just waiting for your signature. His face crumpled. Sarah, please, I came back because I still love you. We can start over, rebuild together. I've changed, I swear. I studied him for a moment, remembering all the times I believed his promises, all the times I'd given him another chance. But I wasn't that person anymore. You want to know the biggest lesson I learned after you left? I asked, leaning forward slightly. Real value isn't about quick returns or crypto millions. It's about building something sustainable, something that helps others while helping yourself. I tapped the stack of property photos. Every one of these transactions represents a family finding their dream home, an entrepreneur starting their business, an investor building their portfolio the right way. That's real wealth, Mark. That's real success. He stared at the divorce papers, his hands clenched in his lap. I have nothing, he said quietly. No job, no savings, nowhere to live. I've been staying on friends' couches, barely getting by. I thought if I could just come back. You thought I'd save you, I finished, like I always did before. But I'm not here to rescue you anymore, Mark. I'm here to finally close this chapter of my life and move forward. Mark's hands shook as he reached for the divorce papers, his coffee now cold and forgotten. What if? He swallowed hard. What if I told you I have a lead on recovering some of the Defimax money? There's this lawyer who specializes in crypto fraud. I held up my hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Are you seriously trying to pitch me another scheme right now? The familiar glint of desperate hope in his eyes told me everything. He hadn't changed at all. He was still looking for the easy way out, still trying to chase phantom riches instead of building something real. It's not a scheme, he insisted, leaning forward. This lawyer, he's already helped other victims recover their investments. We cold. There is no we anymore, Mark. I interrupted, my voice firm. And there's nothing to recover. That money is gone. But that's not why you're really here, is it? He fell silent, unable to meet my eyes. I waited, letting the moment stretch until he finally spoke again. I saw the article about you in Business Weekly, he admitted quietly. Your company's expansion, the new development project downtown. When I realized how successful you become, you thought you could come back and benefit from everything I've built? I finished for him. The same way you once thought you could get rich quick with crypto. Tears welled in his eyes, but I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a calm certainty that I was finally closing the door on this chapter of my life. I was proud of you, he said, his voice breaking. Reading about everything you've accomplished. I realized what a fool I'd been, throwing away our marriage for. Stop, I said firmly. You weren't proud of me, Mark. You were envious. There's a difference. I pulled out one more document from my portfolio, a cashier's check. His eyes widened when he saw the amount, $50,000. This is the exact amount of debt you left me with, I explained, placing the check on top of the divorce papers. I'm offering you a chance to do one right thing. Sign the papers and the money is yours. What's the catch? He asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. The catch is that you disappear from my life completely. No contact, no attempts to reconnect, no trying to leverage our past relationship for your benefit. You take this money and you do what you should have done 2 years ago, start over. And if I don't sign? I smiled, gathering my photos and documents back into my portfolio. Then I proceed with a contested divorce and sue you for the fraud you committed by opening those credit cards in my name. My lawyers have built quite a case, including proof that you forged my signature. That's felony fraud, Mark. Want to guess how many years that carries? The color drained from his face. You wouldn't. The Sarah you knew 2 years ago wouldn't, I agreed. But I'm not her anymore. You taught me a valuable lesson when you walked out. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their actions. His hands trembled as he reached for the pen I'd placed on the table. For a moment, I thought I saw a flash of the man I'd once loved, the one who made me laugh, who dreamed big dreams with me on Sunday mornings. But that man was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. As he signed the papers, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was really over. The check won't bounce, he asked, and I almost laughed at the irony. Even now, he was worried about being scammed. Unlike crypto tokens, Mark, real estate generates real money. The check is good. He stood up, clutching the check like a lifeline. I really did love you, Sarah. No, I said softly, you loved the idea of me, the supportive wife who would always be there to clean up your messes. But that's not love, Mark. That's dependence. After he left, I sat there for a while, finishing my coffee and thinking about the journey that had brought me here. The night he'd walked out had felt like the end of my world, but it had actually been the beginning. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, my newest agent. Client meeting in 30 minutes. The Hendersons are ready to make an offer on the downtown property. I smiled, gathering my things. The Hendersons were a young couple, reminded me a bit of Mark and me when we first started out. But unlike us, they were doing things the right way. Careful planning, thorough research, no shortcuts. As I drove to my office, I thought about the check I'd just given Mark. Some might think I was crazy, giving him money after everything he'd done. But I knew it wasn't really about him. It was about me, about finally cutting all ties with my past and moving forward without any loose ends. The next morning, I stood in front of my team at our weekly meeting. 20 ambitious real estate agents, all drawn to my firm's reputation for integrity and smart investment strategies. Remember, I told them, our job isn't just to sell properties. It's to help people build sustainable wealth, to guide them towards smart decisions that will serve them well in the long run. There are no shortcuts to success. But there is a proven path. Later that day, I received a final text from Mark. Thank you. I'm sorry for everything. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on my computer screen, where I was reviewing plans for our newest project, a mixed-use development that would bring affordable housing and small business spaces to a struggling neighborhood. This was real value, real impact, real success. The manila envelope with the signed divorce papers sat on my desk, ready to be filed. Next to it was a framed copy of the Business Weekly article Mark had mentioned. The headline read, From Teacher to Real Estate Mogul, How Sarah Mitchell Built a $1 Million Empire from Nothing. But they got it wrong. I hadn't built it from nothing. I'd built it from lessons learned, from hard work, from the ashes of broken dreams and betrayal. And in the end, that made it all the more valuable. I opened my calendar to check my next appointment. Another client meeting, another chance to help someone build their future the right way. This was my legacy now, not the money or the success, but the knowledge that I was helping others avoid the mistakes I'd learned from. The sun was setting over the city skyline, casting a golden glow through my office windows. From up here, I could see several properties I'd helped clients purchase, each one representing a dream realized through patience and persistence. Mark's final text still glowed on my phone screen, but I deleted it without a second thought. Some chapters need to stay closed, some bridges need to stay burned, and some lessons need to stay learned. Besides, I had work to do. Real work, building real value, one property at a time. Hi, I'm Rebecca Chen, and this is the story of how my silly little hobby saved my family from financial ruin, though my husband and in-laws took their time learning to appreciate it. Sometimes life's greatest victories come when people underestimate you. I should know, I've been underestimated my entire married life. I still remember the day I told my husband, Michael, that I wanted to start an online business. We were sitting in our kitchen, the one his parents had helped us buy in a suitable neighborhood for their son, the VP of operations at Chen Industries. The morning sun streamed through the windows as I excitedly explained my business plan for curating luxury sustainable fashion boxes. Honey, he said, barely looking up from his Wall Street journal, why don't you focus on planning the next charity gala instead? You're so good at that. His dismissive tone felt like a paper cut, small but stinging. My mother-in-law, Helen, who had the unfortunate habit of dropping by unannounced, chose that moment to sweep in. Online shopping, she scoffed, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her designer handbag. Darling, we Chen women organize charity events and support our husbands. Leave business to the men. I wanted to remind her that before marrying Michael, I'd earned my MBA from Stanford. But in the Chen family, my degree was treated like an attractive accessory, nice to mention at parties, but not meant for actual use. That evening, after Michael left for another essential business dinner, I sat in my home office and launched my website anyway. I'd spent 6 months researching sustainable fashion brands, building relationships with designers, and studying market trends. I called it Greenland Box, a luxury subscription service that delivered carefully curated, sustainable fashion pieces to environmentally conscious professionals. For 3 months, I worked in secret, packing boxes in our garage while my husband was at work. Helen would stop by, see me in casual clothes, sorting through inventory, and click her tongue disapprovingly. If you're bored, dear, the hospital board always needs volunteers, she'd suggest, as if I were a child needing direction. The first sign that I might be onto something came when a major fashion influencer featured one of my boxes on her Instagram. Orders jumped from 50 to 500 overnight. I hired 2 part-time college students to help with fulfillment, converting half our 3-car garage into a makeshift warehouse. Michael barely noticed. He was too busy at Chen Industries, where his father was grooming him to take over as CEO. At family dinners, they discussed business strategies while shooting concerned glances at my cluttered garage. It's just a phase, my father-in-law would assure Michael. Let her play entrepreneur for a while. Then came the feature in Vogue's sustainable fashion issue. They called Greenland Box revolutionary and the future of conscious luxury. Our subscriber base exploded. I leased a small warehouse and hired a full team. But I still hadn't told my husband how big the business had grown. Why bother? He still referred to it as my little project, when forced to acknowledge it at all. The real turning point came exactly 1 year after I'd launched. I was in my office, reviewing our latest quarterly reports. We'd hit 8 figures in revenue, when Michael burst through the door, his face ashen. The SEC is investigating Dad's company, he blurted out. They're freezing all our assets. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd just approved payroll for my 60 employees. What happened? I asked, my heart racing. Not for our finances, I had those covered, but for the pain in my husband's eyes. Dad's partner has been cooking the books for years, he whispered, collapsing into a chair. Everything's gone. The company, our savings, my job, even this house. It's all tied to company assets. I took a deep breath. Michael, there's something I need to show you. But before I could pull up my company's financials, Helen burst in, mascara streaming down her face. It's all gone, she wailed. 30 years of building this family's legacy, destroyed. How will we survive? Rebecca, you'll have to sell your little jewelry-making business or whatever it is. I smiled slightly, thinking of the warehouse down the street where my team was preparing our upcoming holiday collection. Actually, Mom, I said, turning my laptop around, I think it's time we had a family meeting about my little business. The silence in my home office was deafening as Michael and Helen stared at my laptop screen. The quarterly report showed Greenland Box revenue, $12.8 million in just the last 3 months. This must be a mistake, Helen whispered, her manicured hand trembling as she adjusted her pearl necklace. How could you possibly? Michael kept scrolling through the financial documents, his banking background helping him understand exactly what he was seeing. These profit margins, the growth trajectory. Rebecca, are these numbers real? I pulled up our company's profile on Bloomberg Terminal, a subscription I'd kept from my MBA days. Everything's real, independently audited, and completely legitimate, I said quietly. We're currently valued at just over $100 million, and we're in talks with 3 major investment firms for our next expansion round. Helen collapsed into the nearest chair, her Hermes scarf askew. But you pack boxes in the garage. That was a year ago, I explained, pulling up photos of our new warehouse facility. We now have a 50,000 square foot fulfillment center just outside the city. I haven't packed a box myself in months. I have a team of 60 full-time employees and we're hiring more every month. Michael was still staring at the numbers, his face a mix of shock and something else. Was it shame? Why didn't you tell me? He asked softly. I tried in the beginning, I reminded him. Remember that morning in the kitchen? You told me to stick to planning charity galas. After that, I figured I'd let the business speak for itself when the time was right. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was my CEO dashboard alert. We just signed our 50,000th subscriber. I showed them the notification. Each subscriber pays between $200 and $500 per month for our curated boxes, I explained. We have partnerships with over 100 sustainable luxury brands worldwide. That cluttered garage you complained about, Mom, that was just the beginning. Helen's face had gone from shocked to calculating. Well, she said, straightening her designer blouse, clearly you learned more from our family than we realized. Now, about the SEC investigation. Perhaps we could discuss how your success might help the family situation. Mom, Michael interrupted, and I saw something shift in his eyes. For the first time in our marriage, he was seeing me, really seeing me. Not as his wife who needed to be humored, but as a business leader who'd built something remarkable. The SEC investigation, I said firmly, is serious, but I already called Sarah Jean. The Sarah Jean? Helen gasped. The corporate lawyer who handled the Maritech case. I nodded. She's an old Stanford friend. She'll be here tomorrow to review everything. And yes, I'll help with the legal fees. But I held up my hand as Helen's face brightened. There are conditions. Conditions? Helen's voice had a dangerous edge. First, I'll help with legal representation. But I won't touch anything related to Chen Industries directly. My company needs to stay completely separate from this situation. Michael nodded slowly. That's smart. Second, I continued, if we get through this, things need to change. No more dismissing my work. No more surprise visits to criticize how I spend my time. And Michael, I turned to my husband, no more letting your family dictate our life choices. The room fell silent again. Through the window, I could see the sun setting behind the city skyline. Somewhere out there, my warehouse was humming with activity, preparing tomorrow's shipments. I have a board meeting in an hour, I said, gathering my laptop. It's a video call with our investors in Singapore. Take some time to process this. We can talk more over dinner. As I stood up, Michael caught my hand. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have believed in you. I squeezed his hand gently. There's time to fix that. But right now, I need to focus on my company's expansion plans. We're launching in Europe next quarter. Helen opened her mouth, probably to ask about the family's financial crisis, but my phone buzzed again. This time it was my assistant. Mrs. Chen, Forbes is on the line. They want to feature you in their 40 Under 40 issue. I watched my mother-in-law's eyes widen as I responded. Tell them I'll call back in an hour after my board meeting. As I walked out of the office, leaving my stunned husband and mother-in-law behind, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. But the story wasn't over yet. The next few weeks would test our family in ways I never expected. The next few weeks felt like living in a different reality. The same people who had dismissed my little hobby were now watching my every move with newfound interest. The family dynamics had shifted so dramatically, it was almost comical. Sarah Jean, my lawyer friend, took one look at Chen Industries books and grimaced. The good news is Michael and you are legally separate from the main issues, she explained during a late-night meeting in my office. The bad news? Your father-in-law is looking at serious charges. My throat tightened. Despite everything, I didn't want to see Michael's family destroyed. What can we do? With a good legal team, which they now have thanks to you, we can probably negotiate a settlement. But, she paused, reviewing more documents, Chen Industries is finished. There's no saving it. That night, I found Michael sitting in the dark in our kitchen. The same kitchen where he dismissed my business idea a year ago. I keep thinking, he said, staring into his untouched whiskey, about all the times I treated your work like it was nothing. How did you not hate me? I sat down beside him. Because I didn't build Green Glam to prove you wrong. I built it because I believed in it. The next morning, Helen arrived, but this time she called first. Her designer clothes looked somehow deflated. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide her exhaustion. Rebecca, she said formally, I owe you an apology. Several, actually. I made us both coffee, real coffee, not the expensive imported blend she usually insisted on. You don't owe me anything, Mom. But I'd like us to start over. Her hands trembled around the coffee mug. Chen Industries was our whole world, she whispered. Now I don't know who we are anymore. You're still family, I said firmly. That hasn't changed. Over the next month, things moved quickly. My father-in-law agreed to a plea deal that kept him out of prison but required significant financial restitution. Chen Industries was dissolved. And through it all, I watched my husband rediscover himself. I want to learn, Michael told me one evening after sitting in on one of my team meetings. Not just about the business, but about who you are as a leader. If you'll let me. I did better than that. I created a position for him, not in management, but in our sustainability department, where he could learn the business from the ground up. His finance background proved invaluable as we expanded into Europe. But more importantly, I saw him come alive in ways his father's company had never allowed. Helen, surprisingly, found her own path. After the dust settled, she approached me with an idea. Your customers care about sustainability, she said hesitantly. What if we created a foundation? Use your platform to fund environmental initiatives? 6 months later, the Chen Green Initiative launched with Helen as its director. All those years of charity gala planning finally found a meaningful purpose. The woman who once criticized my cluttered garage was now passionately discussing carbon footprints and sustainable manufacturing with my board members. Today, Green Glam Box is valued at over $500 million. We have offices in 12 countries, and our subscriber base has grown to over 200,000. But the real success story isn't in the numbers. Last week, we had a family dinner, not in a fancy restaurant, but in our kitchen. Helen brought homemade dumplings, a skill she'd recently decided to relearn, and Michael excitedly shared updates about our new recycling program. Remember when you said Chen women support their husbands? I asked Helen as we cleaned up afterward. She laughed, a real laugh, not her old society titter. Well, Michael's certainly supporting you beautifully, and doing a fantastic job of it. Michael wrapped his arms around me from behind. Best decision I ever made, he said, kissing my cheek. Though I still can't believe it took me so long to see what was right in front of me. This morning, I received an email from a young entrepreneur asking for advice. She wrote about how her family doesn't believe in her vision, how they want her to take a safe corporate job instead. My response was simple. Build it anyway. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right. And remember, sometimes the people who dismiss your dreams just need time to wake up to your reality. As I sit in my office, looking at the photos on my wall, my team, my family, the garage where it all started, I can't help but smile. The journey wasn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was about staying true to your vision, even when no one else can see it. And sometimes the best part isn't the success itself, but watching the people who dismissed you grow into better versions of themselves when they finally open their eyes to what's possible. My mother-in-law still drops by unannounced sometimes. But now, instead of criticism, she brings ideas. Instead of judgment, she brings hope. And really, isn't that the greatest transformation of all? They say success is the best revenge, but I've learned it's not about revenge at all. It's about growth, not just your own, but the growth you inspire in others, even the ones who never believed in you in the first place. As for that garage where I started, I kept it exactly as it is, cluttered boxes and all. Sometimes, when I need inspiration, I go there and remember where it all began. Because sometimes the biggest dreams start in the smallest spaces, and the greatest victories come from the moments when everyone else says you can't. Get out. James's voice was cold as he stood in our marble foyer, casually swirling whiskey in a crystal glass. Your things are already packed. I stared at the Louis Vuitton suitcases lined up by the door, the ones he'd bought me last Christmas when everything still seemed perfect. My hands trembled, but I kept my voice steady. So that's it? After 8 years of marriage, you're just throwing me out. He smirked, taking another sip. Come on, Emma, let's not make this dramatic. We both know this marriage has served its purpose. Your inheritance helped build ClearTech into what it is today. Now that we're going public, I need someone more suitable by my side, someone who understands the tech world. My name is Emma Chen, and at 34, I was watching my life crumble around me. 8 years ago, I'd married James believing in love and forever. He was brilliant but struggling, working on a startup he swore would change the world. When my parents died in a car accident 2 years into our marriage, leaving me their life savings and family business shares worth $3 million, I didn't hesitate to invest it all in his dream. You mean someone like Melissa? I asked, thinking of his 25-year-old head of marketing who'd been spending more and more time at our house lately. The way she looked at him during dinner parties, how they always seemed to be having late meetings. James's smile widened. Melissa understands vision. She gets what it takes to build something revolutionary. He gestured dismissively with his glass. You were great for the early days. The supportive wife, the generous investor. But ClearTech is worth $100 million now. We're playing in the big leagues. I looked around our mansion. The sweeping staircase, the chandelier that cost more than most cars. The art I'd carefully selected to make this place feel like home. All of it built with my family's money, my trust, my love. The board meets tomorrow to finalize the IPO, James continued, checking his Rolex. Another gift bought with my inheritance. Melissa and I need to prep. So if we could wrap this up. I walked to the suitcases, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Each step felt heavy with 6 years of memories. The dinner parties I'd hosted to help him network, the nights I'd stayed up listening to his ideas, the vacations we'd canceled because he needed to work. I believed in him completely, had been so proud to help build his dream. You know what's funny? I said, turning to face him. You think you've won, that you've played this perfectly. He raised an eyebrow, amused. Haven't I? ClearTech is about to go public. I'm about to become one of the youngest tech billionaires in the country. And you? He shrugged. You'll get whatever the prenup stipulates, which, if I remember correctly, isn't much. I smiled, thinking of everything he didn't know. The quiet moves I'd made over the past year as I watched him grow more distant, more arrogant. The careful planning that would turn his smug grin into shock. Good luck with the IPO, James, I said, grabbing my suitcases. I'm sure it'll be interesting. His confidence faltered for just a moment. What's that supposed to mean? You'll see. I walked out without looking back, the heavy door closing behind me with a final thud. What James didn't know, what he'd been too arrogant to even consider, was that I wasn't as naive as he thought. Growing up in a business family had taught me to always protect myself. While he was busy building his empire and courting Melissa, I'd been watching, learning, and preparing. The inheritance he used to build ClearTech? I had documentation for every penny, dated, notarized, and safely stored with my lawyer. The early company contracts, all carefully preserved, showing my role as more than just a silent investor. The long hours he claimed to be working, I had proof of much more interesting activities. But my real insurance policy was something far more valuable, something that would make tomorrow's board meeting very interesting indeed. I checked into the Four Seasons, a small indulgence I planned ahead for. As I unpacked, my phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Lauren. Are you okay? Did you do it? It's done, I replied. He kicked me out just like we expected. Melissa's already moving in. That smug bastard, she texted back. He has no idea what's coming, does he? I smiled, thinking of the documents safely stored in my laptop. Documents that would turn James's perfect plan upside down. No, I wrote. He doesn't. That night, I sat in my hotel room watching the city lights twinkle below. 6 years ago, James had been a struggling entrepreneur with big dreams. I believed in those dreams, had wanted to be part of building something meaningful. The $3 million from my parents had seemed like fate, a way to honor their memory by helping create something amazing. I remember the day I transferred the money to ClearTech's account. James had hugged me tight, promising we'd build an empire together. You and me against the world, he'd said. Partners in everything. Now here I was, kicked out of my own house so he could move in his girlfriend. The wife who funded his success discarded like yesterday's news. But James had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. Growing up watching my father run his business, I'd learned that trust was good, but documentation was better. My phone buzzed again, this time with an email from my lawyer, Sandra. Everything's in place for tomorrow. Are you sure you want to do this? Once we move forward, there's no going back. I thought about James's smug smile as he dismissed me, about all the nights I'd spent alone while he was working late with Melissa, about how he thought he could use me and throw me away. Unsure, I replied, let's show them what I'm really worth. Tomorrow, James would learn that his perfect plan had one fatal flaw. Me, and I was done being underestimated. As I walked into ClearTech's gleaming headquarters the next morning, the security guard did a double take. Mrs. Chen. Mr. Wilson said, that I wouldn't be coming in anymore. I smiled, sliding my still valid ID card across the desk. He was mistaken about a lot of things, Tham. The elevator ride to the top floor felt surreal. How many times had I visited James here, bringing him lunch during late nights or attending company events? The modern art on the walls, the sleek furniture in the reception area, all of it chosen with my inheritance money. I could hear voices from the boardroom as I approached. James was mid-speech, his voice carrying that confident tone I'd once found so charming. Which is why this IPO will position ClearTech as the leading innovator in cloud security, our proprietary technology. I pushed open the door, and the room fell silent. 12 board members turned to stare at me, their expressions ranging from shock to discomfort. James stood at the head of the table, his presentation frozen on the screen behind him. Next to him, Melissa's perfectly made-up face paled. Emma. James recovered quickly, his smile tight. This is a private board meeting. You shouldn't be here. I took a seat at the far end of the table, placing my laptop in front of me. Actually, I have every right to be here. As a major stakeholder in ClearTech, I think the board should hear what I have to say before voting on the IPO. One of the board members, an older man named Richard, leaned forward. Mrs. Wilson, we were under the impression that you had no official role in the company. It's Ms. Chen. I corrected him, opening my laptop, and that impression was incorrect. In fact, there's quite a lot about ClearTech that needs clarification. James's facade cracked slightly. Emma, don't do this. Whatever you're thinking. I connected my laptop to the presentation screen, and the room gasped. There on display was the original investment agreement, $3 million transferred from my personal account to start ClearTech, with clear terms about my role as a founding investor. As you can see, I said calmly, my investment wasn't just a wife supporting her husband. It was a formal business arrangement with specific conditions about my involvement in major company decisions, like, say, an IPO. The board members shifted uncomfortably, several of them shooting questioning looks at James. He had always portrayed ClearTech as his sole creation, conveniently leaving out the fact that his wife's inheritance had made it all possible. That was years ago, James said dismissively. The company has grown far beyond that initial investment. True, I nodded, clicking to the next slide, which is why I found it interesting that you've been systematically erasing my contributions from company records. These are the original documents, and these, I split screen to show altered versions, are what you submitted to the SEC for the IPO filing. The room erupted in murmurs. Document falsification in an IPO filing was serious, the kind of thing that could derail the entire process and trigger investigations. This is ridiculous, Melissa spoke up, her hand possessively on James's arm. You're just bitter because my husband used my family's money to build this company, then tried to push me out when he thought he didn't need me anymore. I interrupted. No, Melissa, I'm not bitter. I'm just well prepared. I clicked to the next slide, and James's face went ash white. There on the screen were bank statements showing systematic fund diversions from ClearTech's accounts to offshore holdings. Millions of dollars moved quietly over the past year. Would anyone like to explain these transactions? I asked innocently. Because I'm very curious about why company funds were being moved to accounts in the Cayman Islands right before the IPO announcement. Richard, the board member who'd spoken earlier, stood up abruptly. Mr. Wilson, is this accurate? James tugged at his collar, his cool demeanor cracking. These are complex financial arrangements for tax purposes, completely standard. Standard? I raised an eyebrow. Is that what you told Melissa when you promised her shares from these accounts? When you planned to cash out together after the IPO? Melissa jumped up, her chair scraping against the floor. How did you? No. I finished for her. Let's just say you should be more careful about what you discuss over company email, especially when the company's security system was partly funded by the person you're planning to betray. The boardroom erupted into chaos. Several members were on their phones, presumably calling their lawyers. Others were demanding immediate explanations from James, who stood there looking like his perfect world was crumbling around him. This is a simple choice, I said, raising my voice above the commotion. Either we postpone the IPO and restructure the company leadership to reflect its true ownership, or I take this evidence to the SEC. Your call. James stormed around the table toward me, his face contorted with rage. You manipulative bitch, he hissed under his breath. You're trying to destroy everything I built. No, James, I said quietly, meeting his gaze. I'm taking back what's mine, what we built together, before you decided to throw me away. The board quickly called for an emergency recess. As people filed out of the room, many of them already on their phones with crisis managers and lawyers, I packed up my laptop calmly. Everything I'd shown them was just the tip of the iceberg. I had more evidence, more proof of James's deceptions, safely backed up and ready to deploy if needed. Richard, the senior board member, approached me as I stood to leave. Ms. Chen, I think we need to have a longer conversation about your role in ClearTech. Perhaps over lunch? I smiled, shouldering my bag. I'd like that. I have quite a few ideas about the company's future. As I walked out, I caught a glimpse of James and Melissa in heated discussion, their perfect plan falling apart around them. He looked up as I passed, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw fear in his eyes. This was just the beginning. James had thought he could discard me without consequences, but he was about to learn just how expensive that mistake would be. The weeks following the board meeting were a whirlwind of legal negotiations, emergency board sessions, and company restructuring. I watched from my temporary office on the 19th floor, not quite the penthouse suite where James still sat, but close enough to keep an eye on things. The IPO had been postponed indefinitely. After my revelations, the board wasn't taking any chances. They'd hired independent auditors to go through every transaction, every document, every decision made in the past 6 years. What they found made my evidence look tame in comparison. They've uncovered at least $12 million in questionable transactions, Sandra, my lawyer, told me one morning as we reviewed the latest findings. James wasn't just planning to cash out with Melissa. He was setting up a parallel company structure. He was going to use the IPO money to start fresh, leaving ClearTech as an empty shell. I sipped my coffee, looking out over the city skyline. And Melissa? Any word from her legal team? Sandra smirked. She's singing like a canary, turned over everything. Emails, texts, recorded conversations. Apparently, she's not as loyal to James now that his perfect plan has fallen apart. I wasn't surprised. Melissa had always been ambitious, but her loyalty extended only as far as her own interests. Once she realized James couldn't deliver the wealthy future he promised, she'd switched sides quickly. The press had been having a field day with the story. Tech CEO's IPO dreams crumble amid fraud allegations, read one headline. ClearTech founder's wife exposes $1 million deception, screamed another. James' reputation in the tech world, once golden, was now thoroughly tarnished. But I wasn't interested in revenge, I wanted justice. The board had been surprisingly receptive to my proposals for restructuring the company. With James's credibility destroyed and the threat of SEC investigations looming, they were eager to find a stable path forward. The board meeting's in an hour, Sandra reminded me, gathering her papers. Are you ready? I nodded, straightening my blazer. More than ready. The boardroom looked different now. The same sleek table, the same floor-to-ceiling windows. But the energy had changed. James sat at the far end, his usual confidence replaced by barely contained anger. His lawyer whispered something in his ear as I took my seat. Richard called the meeting to order. As you all know, we're here to finalize the leadership restructuring of ClearTech. Following the independent audit and extensive legal review, the board has prepared a resolution. I kept my expression neutral as he read through the terms. James would step down as CEO, though he retained a minority stake in the company. The offshore accounts would be frozen and investigated. And most importantly, I would be installed as executive chairperson, with final say over all major company decisions. This is insane, James burst out, standing up. You're giving her control of my company? Our company, I corrected him quietly, built with my family's money, my support, and my trust. Money you tried to steal, support you abused, and trust you betrayed. The board members shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up to defend James. They'd all seen the evidence, all realized how close they'd come to being implicated in his schemes. The resolution is fair, Richard said firmly. Ms. Chen's investment and early involvement were instrumental in building ClearTech. Her recent actions protected not just her interests, but those of every shareholder and employee. The vote was quick and decisive. 10 in favor, 2 abstaining, none opposed. Just like that, control of ClearTech passed to me. As people filed out of the room, James approached me, his face dark with fury. Congratulations, he spat. You've destroyed everything I worked for. I stood up slowly, gathering my things. No, James, I saved what we built together. You're the one who tried to destroy it with greed and lies. You think you can run this company, he sneered. You don't know the first thing about tech. I know about loyalty, I replied. About building trust and keeping it. The technology might be complex, but the principles of good business are simple, something my father taught me long ago. I walked to the door, then turned back for one last look at the man I'd once loved so completely. The notification popped up on my phone while I was in the middle of a crucial meeting with the board of directors. Another withdrawal from our joint account, $50,000 this time. My hand trembled slightly as I silenced my phone, but I kept my expression neutral as I continued my presentation. Inside, my mind was racing. In the past 3 months, Mark had drained nearly $300,000 from our savings, and I knew exactly where it was going. My name is Sarah Chen, and at 35, I'm the youngest chief financial officer at Morgan & Stanley Investment Group. I spent 15 years building my career from the ground up, working endless hours and sacrificing everything to get where I am. Mark, my husband of 8 years, used to say he admired my drive. That was before Jessica started working as his personal trainer at his exclusive gym. The signs had been there for months. The late nights at the gym, the new wardrobe, the sudden interest in his appearance. But I wasn't as naive as he thought. Being a CFO meant I knew how to follow money trails, and Mark's trail led straight to luxury hotel charges, expensive jewelry purchases, and first-class flights to exotic locations. All with the woman who was supposed to be helping him get in shape. I sat through the rest of the board meeting, my presentation flawless despite the chaos in my mind. When it finally ended, I retreated to my office and pulled up our bank statements. The latest withdrawal had nearly emptied our joint account. Mark clearly thought he was being clever, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. Sarah? My assistant Rebecca poked her head in. Your husband's on line 1. Says it's urgent. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before picking up the phone. Mark? Hey babe, his voice dripped with false cheerfulness. Listen, I need to talk to you about something important. Can you come home early today? I glanced at the bank statement still open on my screen. Of course, I'll be there in an hour. When I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Mark's new Mercedes parked out front, another recent purchase he'd made without consulting me. Our 3-story Victorian home, which we'd bought together 5 years ago, suddenly felt cold and unwelcoming. Mark was waiting in the living room, lounging on our Italian leather sofa with an arrogance that made my blood boil. Sarah, he said, not bothering to get up. We need to talk. About the $300,000 you spent in the last 3 months? I asked calmly, setting my briefcase down. His eyes narrowed slightly, but his smirk remained. Actually, yes, among other things. He stood up, straightening his designer shirt. I've met someone who appreciates me, who makes time for me. Unlike you, she's not obsessed with her career. I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat. You mean Jessica? Your personal trainer? For a moment, his confidence wavered. How did you? I'm a CFO, Mark. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the hotel charges, the jewelry, the flights to Bali? He recovered quickly, his smirk returning. Well, then this makes things easier. I want a divorce. And since I've already moved most of our savings, you might want to think carefully about how difficult you want to make this. I maintained my composure, years of boardroom negotiations serving me well. You really shouldn't have done that, Mark. Why? He scoffed. Because you'll be mad. Because you'll try to take me to court. Good luck proving anything. I've covered my tracks. I smiled then, a small, knowing smile that made his smirk falter. No, you should have done that because that money, it's not really gone, and you've just committed a felony. The color drained from his face as I pulled out my phone and began playing a recording, his voice clearly discussing his plans to hide assets with Jessica. You see, Mark, I've been tracking everything. Every withdrawal, every purchase, every conversation. And there's something else you should know. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. That joint account you've been draining? It's not actually our money. It's company money I was managing for a special investment project. You've just stolen $300,000 from Morgan & Stanley Investment Group. His face went completely white. You're lying, he whispered, but I could see the fear in his eyes. Am I? I asked, laying out the paperwork. Would you like to explain that to the FBI? Because they're very interested in talking to you about wire fraud. Mark collapsed onto the sofa, his arrogance finally cracking. You set me up, he said, his voice hoarse. No, Mark, you set yourself up. I just made sure there would be consequences. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and revelations. I contacted my lawyer, Sarah Martinez, who had been briefed on the situation months ago. She arrived within the hour, armed with more documentation than Mark could comprehend. Mrs. Chen has been gathering evidence for months, Sarah explained, laying out file after file. We have records of every transaction, every conversation, and every meeting between you and Jessica Thompson, including some very interesting wire transfers to offshore accounts. Mark's face grew paler with each document. This is insane, he muttered. You can't prove anything. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Actually, we can. You see, when you're married to someone who specializes in financial fraud detection, you might want to be more careful about your paper trail. I watched as my husband, the man who thought he could outsmart me, began to crumble. The facade of the confident manipulator was falling away, revealing the desperate man beneath. The FBI will be here tomorrow morning, I said calmly. They're particularly interested in those offshore accounts you set up. Did Jessica help you with those, or was that your own brilliant idea? He looked up sharply. Leave her out of this. I'm afraid that's not possible, Sarah interjected. Ms. Thompson is already being questioned. It seems she has quite a history of similar situations with wealthy married men. That hit him like a physical blow. What do you mean? I pulled out another file. Jessica Thompson isn't even her real name. It's Jennifer Williams, and she's been involved in 3 other cases of fraud and extortion. You're not her first Mark. Just her latest victim. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so tragic. Mark had thrown away our marriage for a woman who had been playing him from the start. What do you want? He finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I want every penny back, I said firmly. Not just in our joint account, but everything you spent on her. The hotels, the jewelry, the trips. All of it. And if I can't, then you'll face federal charges for wire fraud and embezzlement. The choice is yours. That night, after Mark had left to think things over, I sat in our home office, staring at the photographs on the wall. 8 years of marriage reduced to evidence files and legal documents. My phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca, my assistant. The team is ready whenever you are. Just say the word. I smiled slightly. What Mark didn't know was that this was just the beginning. While he'd been busy with Jessica, I'd been preparing for something much bigger. The money he'd stolen wasn't just any company funds. It was bait, carefully placed to expose a larger scheme of corruption within our investment firm. Mark's greed had played right into my hands, giving me the evidence I needed to uncover a network of fraud that went far beyond our marital problems. Tomorrow, when the FBI arrived, they wouldn't just be investigating my husband's theft. They'd be uncovering one of the biggest financial scandals in the company's history. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from Jessica, or Jennifer, rather. She wanted to make a deal. I have information, she wrote. About Mark, about the company, about everything. Let me help you and I'll tell you what I know. I leaned back in my chair, considering her offer. Jennifer Williams might be a con artist, but she was also clever. She knew which way the wind was blowing, and she was smart enough to jump ship before it sank. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The FBI would be arriving at 9, but I had preparations to make. As I walked through the quiet halls of Morgan & Stanley, I thought about how different things would look by the end of the day. My office phone rang. It was Mark. "I'll tell you everything," he said without preamble. "About the money, about Jessica, about what's really going on at the company." "I'm listening," I replied, opening my laptop to record the conversation. What followed was a confession that would shake our firm to its foundations. Mark hadn't just been stealing our savings. He'd been part of a sophisticated embezzlement scheme orchestrated by some of the highest-ranking executives in the company. "They approached me 6 months ago," he explained. "Said they knew about my affair with Jessica, about the money I was spending. They offered to help me hide it if I helped them move certain funds around." I kept him talking, recording every detail. By the time he finished, I had enough information to bring down half the executive board. At precisely 9 o'clock, FBI agents entered the building. But they didn't stop at the security desk. Instead, they headed straight for the executive floor. I watched from my office window as FBI agents led our CEO and 3 board members out of the building in handcuffs. The scandal was bigger than anyone had imagined. $50 million in embezzled funds, dozens of fake accounts, and a trail of corruption that spanned 5 years. Mark's involvement had been the key to unlocking everything. His clumsy attempts to hide our savings had exposed a sophisticated money laundering operation that the FBI had been trying to crack for months. My careful documentation and strategic placement of funds had provided the evidence they needed. Jennifer Williams, as it turned out, was more than just a con artist. She was an informant working with the SEC, using her position as a personal trainer to gather information on wealthy clients involved in financial crimes. When she realized I was building a case, she'd reach out to collaborate. "Your husband wasn't the target," she explained during our meeting with the FBI. "He was just the weak link we needed to expose the larger operation. When I saw the transfers he was making, I knew he was involved with something bigger." The fallout was spectacular. Morgan & Stanley's stock plummeted as news of the scandal broke. Clients panicked, investors fled, and the media descended like vultures. But I was ready for that too. "Ms. Chen," a reporter called out as I left the building that evening. "Did you know about the corruption when you took the CFO position?" I stopped, facing the crowd of cameras. "I took this position because I believed in cleaning up Wall Street. Today, we've taken a significant step toward that goal." Back home, I found Mark waiting on the doorstep. He looked broken, nothing like the arrogant man who'd smirked at me just days before. "I'll sign whatever you want," he said quietly. "The divorce papers, the confession, everything. Just tell me one thing. Did you know? When we got married, did you know this would happen?" I studied him for a moment. "No, Mark. When we got married, I believed in us. But when you started stealing from me, you gave me the opportunity to expose something much bigger than our failed marriage." He nodded slowly. "They're offering me a deal. If I testify against everyone involved." "Take it," I advised. "It's better than federal prison." After you left, I sat in our empty house, looking at the life we built together. 8 years of memories, both good and bad, all leading to this moment. My phone buzzed with a message from the FBI. They wanted me to testify before a grand jury next week. The investigation would take months, maybe years. The corruption ran deep, touching banks and investment firms across the country. But I was prepared for that. My team had been gathering evidence for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. As I packed up Mark's things, I found an old photograph from our wedding day. We looked so happy, so full of hope for the future. I tucked it away in a box with other memories of a life I no longer recognized. 6 months later, I stood in court watching Mark testify against his former conspirators. The evidence was damning, detailed records of every transaction, every meeting, every phone call. The executives who had thought themselves untouchable were facing decades in prison. Jennifer Williams testified too, revealing how she'd worked with the SEC to build cases against corrupt financiers. Her testimony, combined with Mark's confession and my documentation, created an airtight case. The aftermath transformed Wall Street. New regulations were passed, oversight was increased, and a message was sent. No one was above the law. Morgan & Stanley underwent a complete restructuring, with me leading the effort to rebuild the company's reputation. Mark took his plea deal and served 2 years in a minimum security prison. The last time I saw him, he was being led away in handcuffs, looking back at me with a mixture of regret and admiration. "You really are brilliant," he said softly. I should have seen that instead of resenting it. I signed the divorce papers the day his sentence began. The house was sold, our assets divided, what was left of them, and our life together became nothing more than evidence in a historical case file. Years later, I received a letter from Mark, postmarked from Seattle where he'd moved after his release. "I understand now," he wrote. "What you did wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about changing a broken system. I'm sorry I couldn't be the partner you deserved in that fight." I didn't reply. Some chapters are better left closed. Today, I run my own financial security consulting firm, helping companies identify and prevent fraud. The Morgan & Stanley case is studied in business schools as an example of how one person's determination can expose systemic corruption. Sometimes, when I'm teaching seminars about financial fraud detection, someone asks if I regret how everything unfolded. I think about Mark, about the life we might have had if he'd made different choices. But then I remember the changes we helped create, the reforms that protect thousands of investors, and I know it was worth it. The lesson wasn't just about money or betrayal. It was about standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. Sometimes the biggest victories come from our greatest losses. Mark taught me that. Not by being a good husband, but by being the perfect example of how greed and arrogance can blind people to their own destruction. His attempt to steal our savings didn't just end our marriage, it helped me expose corruption that had stolen from thousands of people. In the end, that was worth more than any amount he could have taken from our account. The meeting room fell silent as I walked in, all eyes fixed on the woman they'd once shunned. James Morgan, my former father-in-law, sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of barely concealed rage. Beside him his son, my ex-husband David, couldn't even meet my gaze. "Ms. Chen," James said stiffly, emphasizing my maiden name like it was something distasteful. "Thank you for coming." I smiled, setting my laptop on the polished mahogany table. "It's still Mrs. Morgan, actually. The divorce papers were never filed." The color drained from David's face. I hadn't planned to drop that bomb so early, but seeing them squirm gave me a satisfaction I couldn't resist. "My name is Sarah Chen Morgan, and 2 years ago, these people had thrown me out of their lives because I chose cybersecurity over their precious family banking tradition. Now their multimillion-dollar empire was under attack, and I was their last hope." "Let's focus on the matter at hand," James said sharply, sliding a folder across the table. "Our systems were breached last week. The hackers are threatening to release sensitive client data unless we pay $20 million within 48 hours. I picked up the folder, though I already knew its contents. I've been monitoring the situation since it began. Not that they needed to know that. The Great Morgan & Sons Bank, I mused, flipping through the pages, brought to its knees by the very thing you dismissed as irrelevant when I warned you about it. James's jaw tightened. "If you're here to gloat, I'm here because your head of it called me directly." I cut him off. He said, "You've tried everything else. Every security firm in the city turned you down because they know your systems are outdated. You're running infrastructure from the last decade because, and I quote, traditional banking doesn't need all that modern nonsense." David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Sarah, please, this isn't the time." "When is the time, David?" I asked, meeting his eyes for the first time. "When you stood silent while your father threw me out? When you chose your trust fund over our marriage? Or maybe now, when everything's falling apart?" 2 years earlier, this same room had witnessed a very different scene. I'd just completed my master's in cybersecurity, turning down a prestigious position at Morgan & Sons to accept a role at a leading tech firm. The betrayal, as James saw it, was unforgivable. "No Morgan has ever worked outside this bank," he shouted, pacing the room like a caged animal. "For 4 generations, we've built this legacy. and you want to throw it all away to play with computers. I tried to explain the importance of modern security measures, how the banking world was changing. But James Morgan didn't listen to women who challenged his authority, not even his daughter-in-law. Either you take your rightful place in this bank, he declared, or you're no longer welcome in this family. I looked to David then, hoping he'd finally stand up to his father. But he just stared at his shoes, shoulders slumped in familiar defeat. So I'd walked out, leaving behind their outdated ideas and suffocating traditions. I built my own consulting firm, gained a reputation as one of the best in the field. And now here they were, desperate for the very expertise they'd mocked. The hack is sophisticated, I said, returning to the present, but not impossible to trace. I can help you, but I have conditions. James leaned back, his expression wary. What conditions? I opened my laptop, typing quickly. First, you'll implement every security measure I recommend, without argument. Second, you'll create a dedicated cybersecurity division with a proper budget. And third, I paused, savoring the moment, you'll make a public announcement acknowledging the breach and my role in resolving it. Absolutely not, James exploded. We've never admitted to any security failures. The Morgan reputation is about to be destroyed anyway, I finished. In 47 hours, every account number, every transaction, every dirty little secret will be public. Your choice. The silence that followed was deafening. James's face had turned an alarming shade of red, while David looked like he might be sick. There's one more thing, I added, pulling up a series of emails on my screen. Something interesting I found while examining the hack. Would you like to see who had access to your systems the night before the breach? David's head snapped up, real fear in his eyes now. He knew exactly what I'd found. The late-night login, the disabled security protocols, the convenient gaps in the firewall, all traced back to one executive access code. His code. We should discuss this privately, he said quickly, standing up. But I was done with their secrets, their backroom deals, their carefully maintained facades. Sit down, David, I said quietly. It's time everyone knew exactly what kind of legacy your father has built. The projector hummed to life as I connected my laptop. David's access logs appeared on the screen, damning in their clarity. On Tuesday night at 11:43 p.m., I said, addressing the stunned board members, someone using executive code N7249 disabled the main firewall. 3 minutes later, they accessed the secure client database. By midnight, the backup systems were compromised. I turned to David. Would you like to explain why your code was used, or should I continue? James slammed his fist on the table. This is absurd. My son would never. Your son has been embezzling from Morgan & Sons for the past year. I cut in, switching to a new slide. Small amounts at first, carefully hidden in transaction fees. But lately he's gotten bolder. Haven't you, David? The room erupted in whispers as I displayed the evidence, transaction records, offshore accounts, falsified audits. David had been busy since I'd left, though not in ways his father would approve. You've been watching us, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. All this time. I nodded. Did you really think I'd walk away completely? I built half these systems. I know every backdoor, every vulnerability, including the ones you exploited. Why? James demanded, turning on his son. We gave you everything. David laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the room. Everything except a choice. Did you ever ask what I wanted, Dad? If I wanted to spend my life trapped in this mausoleum of tradition. I watched my ex-husband carefully. The perfect Morgan hair was crumbling before our eyes, years of resentment spilling out. The hack, one of the board members spoke up. Was it you? David shook his head. No, I made it possible. They approached me months ago. Said they could help me disappear, start fresh. All I had to do was leave a door open. You fool, James hissed. You've destroyed everything we've built. You destroyed it, David shot back. With your rigid rules, your impossible standards. Sarah was right about modernizing, about the security risks, but you wouldn't listen. You never listen. I cleared my throat. As fascinating as this family therapy session is, we're running out of time. The hackers don't care about your drama. They want their money, or everything goes public in. I checked my watch, 46 hours. James seemed to deflate, suddenly looking every bit his 65 years. Can you stop them? Yes, I said simply. I've already identified their location and method of attack, but my conditions stand, and I'm adding one more. What now? James asked warily. David turns himself in. No cover-up, no quiet resignation. The authorities need to know exactly what happened. David stood up so fast his chair toppled backward. You can't be serious. Sarah, please, we were married. Doesn't that mean anything? I met his gaze steadily. It meant everything. That's why I waited 2 years to find the right moment. To show your father exactly what happens when he values his precious legacy over people. You planned this? James said slowly, realization dawning. You knew about David's activities all along. You waited until we were desperate. I learned from the best, I replied coldly. Isn't that what Morgans do? Use every advantage, never show weakness. You taught me well during those family dinners, James. The board members watched our exchange like a tennis match, decades of Morgan family dysfunction playing out before them. Some looked horrified, others oddly fascinated. Time's running out, I reminded them, closing my laptop. I'll be in my office when you're ready to meet my terms. All of them. I gathered my things, enjoying the heavy silence. At the door, I paused. Oh, and David. Those divorce papers you never filed? I have copies in my office. We can deal with that after you've turned yourself in. As I walked out, I heard James's voice, surprisingly quiet. What have we done? What indeed, I thought, stepping into the elevator. The Morgans had spent generations building their fortress of wealth and tradition, never realizing they were sealing themselves in a tomb. Now those walls were crumbling, and I was the only one who could prevent total collapse. The irony wasn't lost on me. The next 48 hours transformed Morgan and Sons Bank forever. David surrendered to the authorities that evening, confessing everything, the embezzlement, his role in the hack, years of financial misconduct. The press had a field day. Morgan here betrays dynasty, banking legacy crumbles. I watched it unfold from my office across town, sipping coffee and monitoring the bank's systems. James had agreed to my terms, though I suspected it nearly killed him to do so. A team of my best engineers was already upgrading their security infrastructure, dragging Morgan and Sons into the modern era whether they liked it or not. You're really not going to tell them, are you? Grace asked, perched on the edge of my desk. My best friend and business partner had been with me through everything, helping orchestrate what the media was calling the biggest banking scandal of the decade. I shook my head, pulling up the final piece of code on my screen. They don't need to know. That you were the hacker all along. That there never was a $20 million ransom, she laughed softly. Sarah, you practically performed surgery on their entire system, exposed years of corruption, and they think you're their savior. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies, I said, thinking of all those family dinners where I'd been treated like an outsider. It's about making them thank you for saving them from themselves. The truth was elegantly simple. There had been no external hackers. I'd spent 2 years monitoring the bank systems, watching David's crimes accumulate, waiting for the perfect moment. When he'd grown sloppy enough, I created a sophisticated trail of breadcrumbs leading to phantom attackers. The ransom demand was theater designed to force the Morgans' hands. My phone buzzed, James Morgan's number. Sarah, he said when I answered, his voice rough. The board meeting just ended. They've voted me out. Effective immediately. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. I'm sorry to hear that. No, you're not, he sighed heavily. You're probably delighted. Just like you planned. I didn't plan your downfall, James. You and David did that yourselves. I just made sure the truth came out. There was a long pause. The truth? He repeated bitterly. Do you know what the board wants now? They want you to take over as head of security, a permanent position, direct report to the new CEO. Now it was my turn to pause. This wasn't part of my plan. They're impressed with how you handled the crisis, he continued. Said it's time for new blood, modern perspectives. Everything you tried to tell us 2 years ago. I thought about the irony, the position they'd once denied me, now being offered freely. But I had built something of my own now, something that didn't require their approval or acceptance. Thank them for the offer, I said carefully, but I'll have to decline. My consulting firm keeps me quite busy. Of course it does, James replied, and I heard something new in his voice. Respect, maybe, or resignation. You never needed us, did you? Not really? No, I agreed. But you needed me, you just couldn't admit it. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a moment, thinking about legacy. The Morgans had been so focused on preserving their traditional banking dynasty that they failed to see the world changing around them. Their rigid adherence to the past had created the perfect conditions for their own undoing. A week later, I filed the divorce papers myself. David, facing multiple federal charges, signed them without argument. As I walked out of the courthouse, legally free of the Morgan name, I felt lighter somehow. The bank survived, though changed forever. New leadership, modern systems, transparent operations, everything I'd advocated for years ago. My firm handled their security transitions, commanding fees that would have made James Morgan choke. Sometimes I caught glimpses of my former father-in-law around the city, looking older and more subdued. The great Morgan legacy he'd fought so hard to protect had crumbled under its own weight, reformed into something he barely recognized. As for me, my consulting firm flourished, built on the reputation of saving Morgan and Sons from catastrophe. Other banks saw our services, desperate to avoid similar scandals. I became known as the woman who'd modernized old-world banking, though few knew the full story of how it happened. One evening, almost a year later, I received an unexpected visitor. James Morgan stood in my office doorway, grayer and thinner than I remembered. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said without preamble. "About tradition, adaptation, pride." I was wrong, Sarah. About everything. I gestured for him to sit. "Would you like some coffee?" He shook his head. "I'm selling my shares in the bank. All of them. The new board has made an offer." "Smart decision," I said. "Let them take it in a new direction." "Like you did?" He smiled faintly. "I know it was you, Sarah. The hack, the ransom, all of it. Took me months to figure it out, but once I did, it was brilliant. Ruthless, but brilliant." I met his gaze steadily. "Would you have preferred real hackers? Actual theft? Sometimes the best protection comes from someone who knows exactly where you're vulnerable." He nodded slowly. "You found our weakness, not in the systems, but in our pride, our refusal to change." He stood up, straightening his jacket. "I just wanted you to know, I understand now, what you were trying to tell us all along." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "James, thank you." "For what?" "For teaching me that sometimes the strongest legacy isn't the one we inherit," I said. "It's the one we build for ourselves." He smiled, a real smile this time. "Goodbye, Sarah. Make sure they do better than we did." I watched him go, thinking about legacy, redemption, and the price of pride. The Morgans had wanted to preserve their dynasty at all costs, never realizing that true strength comes from being willing to tear everything down and build something better from the ruins. In the end, that was my real revenge, not destroying their legacy, but transforming it into something worthy of survival. Something that would last long after the old guard had faded away. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest victory of all.